letting go like the tree. The tree does not cling to its fruit, it lets go when the time comes. In the natural world, nothing holds on forever. A tree spends months nurturing a fruit, pulling nutrients from the soil, braving the wind, sheltering it from rain, only to release it when it ripens. It does not beg the fruit to stay. It does not fear the emptiness that follows. It lets go, because that is the way of things. Humans struggle with this deeply. We cling to relationships that have soured jobs, that no longer inspire identities, that no longer fit. Letting go feels like failure, but nature teaches a different wisdom, that release is not abandonment, it is growth. The tree does not lose the fruit, it fulfills its purpose by letting it fall. There's pain in detachment, but only because we confuse possession with love. The tree still nourishes, it still stands, but it knows that clinging would only rot the fruit. The same applies to moments, people, beliefs. When we grip too tightly, we bruise what was once beautiful, and we suffer, not because things end, but because we resist their ending. Letting go at the right time is not weakness, it is strength disguised as surrender. It means trusting the cycle. It means believing that what falls away creates space for something new. That emptiness is not a void, but an invitation. The tree does not fall apart when the fruit drops. It prepares to bloom again. Some things are meant to be released. Some seasons ask for soft hands, not tight fists, and just like the tree, wisdom means knowing when the time has come. Holding on too long turns nourishment into decay, but letting go at just the right moment allows something else to take root, silently, invisibly, but powerfully. The quieter the drum, the quiet strength in restraint deeper. Its echo in the forest of thought. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes a rare form of rebellion. The quiet drum doesn't fight for attention. It doesn't scream to be heard, and yet its subtle rhythm travels further, resonates deeper, and lingers longer in the minds of those who listen. There's a strange power in restraint, in not trying to impress, in letting presence speak louder than volume ever could. True influence doesn't always come from shouting opinions or dominating conversations. It comes from the kind of stillness that unsettles and awakens, the kind that cuts through chaos like a blade through smoke. When someone speaks slowly, thoughtfully, deliberately, their words carve through the noise and settle like dust on in the corners of the mind, impossible to ignore. That's what the quieter drum does. It doesn't strike often, but when it does, the forest listens. The same applies to thought. The loudest thoughts, those full of panic, craving, fear, drown out the real insight. But when the mind softens, when it stops trying to control or predict or chase, a deeper echo begins to rise, an intuition, a truth not manufactured but uncovered. This is not the kind of echo that fades. It returns again and again, reminding, whispering, waking something ancient inside the ego. Wants volume, it wants recognition, but wisdom walks barefoot in the mind. It doesn't announce itself, it stirs slowly, and only those quiet enough to notice will feel its ripple. The quieter the drum, the less it needs to prove, and paradoxically, the more it moves in the end. The deepest changes in a person's life don't begin with reverence in the ordinary shouting. They begin with a whisper that refuses to leave. Drink your tea slowly and reverently, as if it were the axis on which the world spins. There is a kind of sacredness hidden in the mundane, and tea holds it quietly in its warmth when one drinks it slowly, not to quench thirst, not to kill time, but to be fully present. The world begins to shift. Each sip becomes a ceremony. Each breath between tastes becomes a prayer. The chaos outside pauses, not because it disappears, but because it no longer owns the moment. The problem isn't that life is too fast. It's that attention is too scattered. People eat while scrolling, speak while thinking of replies, live while already imagining what's next. But the tea has no future, no past. It only exists in the now. And if the entire universe could be poured into a cup, it would ask one thing in return. Be here completely to drink tea reverently is to bow to simplicity. The hand that holds the cup becomes still. The thoughts soften like steam rising from the surface in that moment. Nothing is missing. There's no chase, no performance, no proving. There is only being, and that is enough. It's not about the tea, it's about the slowness, the intimacy. The decision to treat something ordinary as extraordinary reverence is not reserved for temples. It's available in the way the cup touches the lip, in the way warmth travels down the throat, in the way the body sighs without asking permission. The world spins on many illusions, but presence is not one of them. And when the act of drinking becomes an act of devotion, even the smallest moment becomes holy in that silence where nothing is demanded and everything is felt. Life becomes full, so full, in fact, that nothing else is needed to walk without leaving a trace, is the presence without a trace. Highest form of presence. True presence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't crave applause or proof it arrives. Lives and departs without disturbing the surface of the world, and yet somehow its absence is deeply felt. To walk without leaving a trace is not to be invisible, but to move through life so gently, so consciously, that nothing is harmed by your passing. Not the people, not the places, not even the silence. Most live loudly, leaving marks behind, regrets, resentments, possessions, judgments. There is an urge to be remembered, to be noticed, to make a dent. But the ancient wisdom says otherwise. It whispers that the greatest impact is not forceful. It's seamless, like wind through trees, like moonlight on water, like a footprint in snow that melts before its notice. To walk without a trace is to love, without controlling to give, without attaching to speak, without wounding. It is the art of disappearing into the very act of living without carving your name into every surface. It means not needing to be the center, not needing to be right, not needing to own what cannot be kept. Presence in its purest form is selfless. It's the ability to be fully here, fully engaged while asking for nothing in return. It's the teacher who leaves no ego in the lesson, the parent who raises without binding the guest, who leaves a room lighter than they found it. That is the kind of presence that lingers not in memory, but in the energy left behind. This is not eraser, it is refinement. It's the discipline of stepping softly through the world, knowing that everything you touch is alive, and when your time is over, the world is still whole. Maybe even more so because you were gentle enough to pass through it without taking more than you gave a still pawn, reflects the stars more clearly than a rushing stream. Clarity is not found in movement, but in stillness. The stars are always there, brilliant and ancient, but they don't reveal themselves to waters that never rest. A rushing stream might be alive, powerful, dramatic, but it cannot mirror the sky. Its surface is too restless, its rhythm too loud. Only the pond in its quiet surrender becomes a perfect mirror. Only in stillness does the truth appear without distortion. The same is true for the mind. When thoughts race, when emotions churn, when the heart is caught in urgency, even the brightest insights remain hidden. But when the mind settles, truly settles, reality reveals itself, not as something new, but as something that's always been there, waiting. Peace is not an achievement, it is what is left. When the noise is no longer fed, people are taught to chase clarity, to analyze, to solve, to grasp. But the ancient lesson teaches a different path. Stop, wait, breathe. Allow the mind to stop grasping for understanding, and understanding begins to emerge on its own like stars that appear only when the sky grows dark enough, like truths that whisper, not shout. A still pawn doesn't force the reflection. It simply allows it. It offers no resistance. That's the secret, not to conquer the chaos, but to stop reacting to it, to be so present that nothing needs to be added or changed, and in that silence, the reflection becomes perfect. Stillness is not weakness, it is precision, it is patience. It is the quiet strength to remain calm in a world that screams for motion. The stars don't change, the truth doesn't vanish, but only those willing to stop moving can see how brilliantly it's always been shining. The wound is where pain, as a teacher, the teaching enters, not where the story ends. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't just hurt, it shatters. It doesn't knock politely, it barges in, wrecking everything familiar, and when it's done, it leaves silence so loud it echoes. In that silence, most think the story ends. That heartbreak, betrayal, failure, loss. Whatever carved the wound was the final chapter, but that's not where it ends. That's where it begins, because the wound is not just a scar waiting to fade. It's an opening, a doorway, and through it something sacred tries to enter. People spend years covering their pain like it's shameful. They numb it, outrun it, decorate it with distractions, but wounds don't disappear just because they're ignored. They wait quietly until one day something cracks and they speak, and when they do, they teach not with words, but with truths too honest to deny. They reveal what mattered, what broke, what never healed, and what desperately wants to grow. Some of the wisest souls carry the deepest wounds, not because they deserved the pain, but because they allowed it to transform them. They didn't stop at the hurt. They let it humble them, open them, guide them, and in doing so, they discovered that pain isn't proof of weakness. It's evidence of depth. When the wound is still fresh, it's hard to believe anything good could ever come from it. But over time, when the screaming quiets and the soul stops resisting, something unexpected happens. The pain becomes a compass, and the very thing that once seemed to ruin everything becomes the seed of everything worthwhile. The wound doesn't close the book, it rips open the page. Life has been waiting to write, and in that rawness, in that unbearable honesty, the real lesson begins, not in spite of the wound, but through it. Speak only when the words are, when silence is wiser, better than silence, or else hold them in reverence. Words have weight, they cut, they heal, they echo, but most are thrown carelessly, like stones into still water, without thought, for the ripples they cause. The ancient ones knew this, that silence is not emptiness, it's a sacred space. And every time it is broken, it should be for something that matters, not to fill the air, not to be heard, but to bring truth or beauty or peace to speak. Only when words are better than silence is not to be passive, it is to be precise. It means resisting the urge to fix with advice, to impress with noise, to defend with reaction. It means allowing stillness to linger, even when it's uncomfortable, because silence is often the only honest answer. Speech, when held in reverence, becomes an offering, not a weapon. It is not used to dominate or decorate, but to connect, to bring understanding. Where there was confusion, to offer calm. Where there was pain, and when that cannot be done, silence is wiser. The more one speaks, the more diluted their meaning becomes. But when someone speaks rarely and with care, their voice is heard like thunder, because it is not frequency that gives words power. It is intention, it is restraint, it is the ability to feel a thought rise and choose to let it pass. Holding words in reverence is an act of humility. It means accepting that silence is often more generous than speech, that not every thought deserves a voice, that wisdom is not measured by how much one says, but by what is left unsaid in the end. The words that change lives are never loud. They arrive slowly, like falling leaves disrupting nothing, and in their wake, the silence becomes even more profound. A shadow does not grow larger. When feared, it only blocks more light. Shadows and fear has a strange way of distorting reality. What begins as a faint shadow, a passing worry, a quiet discomfort suddenly stretches and swells the moment it's noticed. But a shadow itself hasn't changed. It doesn't grow on its own. It expands only in the mind, fed by the attention it's given. Fear doesn't empower the shadow, it empowers the illusion. The more it's feared, the more light it hides, until all that's left is darkness that was never truly there. People often mistake shadows for threats. They see uncertainty and call it danger. They see discomfort and name it doom, and so they avoid the shadow, turn from it, run from it, hide from it, without realizing that this act alone gives it weight. But a shadow has no substance. It cannot touch, it cannot harm it, only blocks vision. And when it's feared, it doesn't become stronger, it just covers more light that was always present. The tragedy is not the presence of the shadow, it's what gets missed. Because of it, joy, clarity, connection all get dimmed, not because they vanished, but because the shadow is given center stage. The mind becomes a theater for fear, and the longer the spotlight stays on the shadow, the longer light stays out of reach. But the moment attention shifts, the moment the fear is met, named, and looked at, honestly, the illusion breaks. The shadow shrinks, not because it was destroyed, but because the light was finally allowed back in. It was never about defeating the shadow. It was about refusing to give it more space than it deserves. Fear does not change the shape of the shadow. It just blinds the one watching, and the more light that's feared, the more that the power of inaction light gets blocked. True wisdom is knowing when not to act. The world celebrates the doer, the one who charges forward, solves problems, conquers, builds fights. Stillness, on the other hand, is often mistaken for weakness, but true wisdom lives in restraint. It is not always the one who moves first, who is strongest, but the one who understands that sometimes doing nothing is the most powerful choice of all. Not acting isn't the same as avoiding it, isn't fear. It's the ability to see the fire and not pour water or gasoline on it. It's recognizing that not every storm must be chased, not every insult must be answered, not every discomfort must be solved. There are moments when the wisest path is to pause, to wait, to allow things to unfold without interference. That kind of discipline looks like inaction, but it's a decision carved from deep understanding. There is a kind of silence that speaks volumes, a kind of stillness that shakes the foundations more than any flurry of reaction ever could. It takes maturity to hold back when everything inside screams to respond. It takes clarity to see that time can solve what panic only complicates, and it takes courage to resist the illusion that control is always found in action. Wisdom is not about knowing what to do, it's about knowing when not to. When stepping back creates space for truth, when silence reveals more than explanation. When patience becomes sharper than any blade, the fool leaps at every chance to prove themselves. The wise wait for the moment when action will actually matter. To not act is often the loudest form of presence. It says, I see what's happening, I understand the pull, but I trust something deeper. And in that trust, everything begins to settle into its rightful place. Even the most skilled hunter bows to the rhythm of the season. Mastery gives the illusion of control. The skilled believe their craft can bend time, that their precision can outwit nature, but the seasons don't bow to talent. They don't rush for hunger or pause for ambition. Even the finest hunter, the one who knows every trail, every whisper in the wind, must wait, because no matter how sharp the aim or how steady the hand, the forest moves to a rhythm that cannot be commanded. There is an ancient wisdom in knowing when not to act. A hunter may wake with hunger, polish his tools, and walk the familiar paths. But if the forest is still, if the prey has disappeared into the folds of winter or the silence of breeding time, there is nothing to do but listen, wait, watch. And in that stillness, the hunter is humbled not by failure, but by the truth that life unfolds on a clock older than any human plan modern life forgets. This rhythm, it worships constant motion. Productivity is mistaken for purpose, and waiting is confused with weakness. But those who understand nature really understand it. Know that every season has its role. There are seasons to gather, and there are seasons to rest, seasons to hunt, and seasons to sit in silence beside an empty path. The wise don't force the forest, they learn to breathe with it. Bowing to the season is not giving up, it's aligning. It's realizing that some forces are not obstacles, but teachers, and in waiting for the right time, the skilled hunter becomes something greater than skilled. He becomes timeless, because true mastery isn't about control, it's about reverence. It's about knowing that the world has its own pace, and sometimes the highest wisdom is to pause and let the season speak. The fish in the net still believes illusions of freedom. It is swimming free. There is a kind of illusion more dangerous than chains. It's the illusion of freedom. The fish tangled in the net still moves, still turns, still flicks its tail. It feels motion and mistakes it for liberty, but every movement is contained. Every choice is bounded, and it doesn't realize that what feels like freedom is only the room it's been given inside a trap. Humans live like this too, convinced they are free because they can choose between two jobs, two brands, two opinions, but they rarely question the net itself, the system, the beliefs, the invisible rules that shape those options. They say what they're allowed to say. They dream within acceptable limits, and still they call it freedom. The most dangerous cages are the ones dressed like comfort, the routines, the scrolling, the rules handed down silently by family culture. Fear people swim through life thinking they are in control, not realizing that every current is pulling them toward a place they didn't choose. They feel busy, they feel active, they even feel important, but movement does not equal liberation. This is why awakening is painful, because it doesn't give new answers. It exposes the trap, it shows the net, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. You begin to notice how often your thoughts aren't really your own, how often you say yes when you meant no, how often your life is a performance to please someone who isn't even watching. Freedom begins not with action, but with awareness. The fish cannot break the net until it realizes it's caught, and the moment you begin to question what you've always accepted, something shifts, the water feels different, the silence becomes louder, and suddenly the movements you once called freedom feel small, rehearsed hollow. That is where real choice begins. A fool rushes to win, choosing peace over war. The wise find a way not to enter the battle. There's a thrill in the clash, a seductive pride that comes from charging headers into conflict. The fool sees opposition as a test of strength, a chance to dominate, to prove something, and so he prepares his weapons, sharpens his tongue, and steps into every confrontation, as if victory will grant him peace. But peace never comes from war. It comes from understanding how not to need one. The wise know this. That's why they rarely fight. Battles aren't always fought on battlefields. They erupt in relationships, in boardrooms, in daily interactions, masked as arguments, ego games, and subtle power struggles. The fool, driven by impulse, dives, and he mistakes reaction for courage and believes being loud makes him right. But the wise don't rush, they listen longer than they speak. They see the trap behind the bait. They ask not, can I win this? But should I even be here? Avoiding the fight isn't cowardice, it's clarity. It's recognizing that not every hill is worth dying on, and not every opponent is an enemy. Often the greatest victory is to walk away without ever drawing a sword. The wise seek harmony, not because they fear resistance, but because they understand the cost of unnecessary war, burned bridges, poisoned minds, sleepless nights. They know that every battle leaves scars. Even the ones won real power lies in restraint, in choosing silence when provoked, in walking away from insults that don't deserve your energy, in solving the problem, not feeding the fire The fool seeks to win the moment. The wise protect the bigger picture, because while the fool builds his identity on battles, the wise build their legacy on peace, and history always remembers who truly avoided the war, not who shouted the loudest. You do not need to stop chasing the moon to chase the moon to feel its light. The moon gives freely, it asks for nothing in return. It does not demand pursuit, nor does it hide from those who stand still, and yet people run toward success, toward validation, toward some distant promise of peace, as if joy must be earned through exhaustion. But the most luminous things in life cannot be chased. They can only be received. There is a deep madness in the belief that worth is found in striving, that something more must always be. Done that, rest is laziness, stillness is failure, and happiness is always somewhere else. But the moon has never moved faster to impress. It simply rises night after night, and those who take the time to look up are bathed in its quiet glow. To feel the light, one must stop running. That's the paradox. Chasing the moon will only leave you breathless and in the dark, always one step behind, but standing still, present, open, unguarded. That's where the light finds you. The same is true of love, of clarity, of peace. They don't come to those who chase them. They come to those who are ready to feel them. Modern life tells a different story. Be faster, work harder, earn your rest, but ancient wisdom knew better, the things that matter most. Truth, connection, inner freedom are not won by force. They're noticed in the quiet. They're felt in the pauses. They arrive when the noise dies down and the heart softens enough to receive. You don't need to chase the moon. You only need to stop long enough to notice that it's already shining on your skin, already offering its light, already here, and in that realization, the desperate search ends. The light wasn't distant. It was waiting for stillness, all the strength of patience along. Patience is the art of watching the fruit ripen without tearing it from the branch. There is a quiet agony in waiting, especially when the reward is just within reach. The fruit is there visible, full tempting. It's easy to justify reaching for it too soon, convincing yourself it's good enough or that tomorrow might be too late. But true patience is restraint with wisdom. It is trusting the process over impulse. The fruit if torn too early tastes of bitterness, but when left to ripen fully, it falls into your hands with grace. No force, no regret, just readiness in life. People often rush. They chase answers, outcomes. People dreams, pulling at branches not yet ready to give. And in that haste, they bruise what was meant to blossom. They sabotage what could have been whole, because patience isn't just waiting. It's knowing how to wait. It's a discipline, not a delay. A belief that things unfold best when allowed their time. The impatient mind asks, when the patient heart whispers, let it be. There's a sacred stillness in letting life mature on its own terms. It means staying rooted while the unseen work happens. It means trusting that what is meant for you is not ripening away from you. It's ripening towards you, and it will not arrive a moment too late. The greatest acts of love, creation, and growth cannot be rushed. A relationship forced too soon wilts. A decision made too quickly falters. A dream pushed too hard collapses under its own weight. But the one who waits with care, who watches without grabbing supports, without pressing, becomes part of something deeper than desire. They align with timing instead of resisting it, because patience isn't passive. It's powerful. It's saying, I'm ready whenever it's right. And when it is, the fruit doesn't need to be taken. It gives itself freely. The eye that sees everything forgets how to see. Within there is a kind of blindness that comes from seeing too much. The eye that constantly scans the horizon, that craves more sights, more knowledge, more stimulation, eventually loses touch with what lies behind it. It sees the world in vivid detail, its trends, its drama, its flaws, but it no longer sees the soul behind the seeing. The gaze becomes a spotlight that never turns inward, and in that relentless outward focus, the self begins to fade. Modern life feeds this imbalance, Screens glow with endless images. News cycles demand attention, and comparison becomes a daily ritual. The mind is flooded with information, but a heart is starved of reflection. One becomes an expert in the lives of others, yet a stranger to their own. The noise outside grows louder, while the inner voice, once clear and grounding, grows faint. The tragedy is subtle because the eye still works. It still captures beauty and tragedy and movement, but without the inward gaze, it loses meaning. It sees, but it does not understand. It captures, but it does not connect. The mirror is polished, yet the soul behind it is dusted, covered, and forgotten. To see within is not to turn away from the world. It is to reorient the gaze. It is to pause, close the floodgates, and ask, who is the one behind all this watching? What do I feel? What do I need? What am I avoiding by always looking out? The eye that sees everything is powerful, but power without self-awareness is hollow. Insight does not live in a spectacle. It lives in silence, and when the gaze finally turns inward, when the watcher becomes the watched, something ancient stirs, not a new vision, but a remembering, the kind of seeing that heals. Instead of just observing a cracked bowl, still holds the warmth of the soup. Perfection is a myth. Cracks that still hold warmth, that breaks more people than any flaw ever could. There's this quiet lie whispered by the world that only the unbroken are worthy. Only the flawless are useful. Only the untouched can be loved. But the truth is quieter still and far more enduring. A cracked bowl still holds the warmth of the soup. It might not look the way it used to. It might carry lines from what it's been through, but it holds, it serves, it nourishes. And in that, it proves something essential. Function does not vanish with the imperfection. Everyone carries cracks, losses that left marks, choices that haunt, traumas stitched under smiles. And yet there's this aching tendency to hide them, to apologize for them, to believe they disqualify you from giving or receiving anything meaningful. But the warmth still stays, even when chipped, even when uneven, even when you're afraid someone might notice. Where it broke, the beauty isn't in pretending the crack isn't there. It's in realizing it never took away your purpose. The bowl doesn't have to be whole to be worthy. It just needs to hold just enough to carry warmth, to offer comfort, to let someone sip something real from it. The crack doesn't define it. It tells a story. In some cultures, they fill broken pottery with gold. Not to hide the fracture, but to honor it, to show that the break is not the end of value, but the beginning of character. The same is true of people. The warmth others feel from you doesn't come from how perfect you are. It comes from how deeply you've lived, how fiercely you've endured, how gently you still offer yourself, despite it all. Because sometimes the cracked bowl is the one that's been chosen again and again, not in spite of its cracks, but because of them. Do not mistake motion. Don't mistake motion for growth. For growth, some weeds grow faster than trees. Movement is seductive. It feels like progress, like purpose, like power. But not all motion is meaningful. Not all growth is good. Weeds burst through soil with speed, spreading quickly, taking over spaces meant for something deeper. Trees, on the other hand, grow slowly, quietly underground, before above their strength is built in patience, not performance. The modern world worships speed, fast results, instant gratification, rapid success. People hustle, pivot, climb, and when they move fast, they believe they're evolving, but often they're just reacting, chasing, spinning. It feels like growth, but it's often just escape, a desperate attempt to avoid stillness where real transformation demands to be faced. Some of the most broken patterns wear the costume of ambition. Some of the most toxic habits feel productive, working without rest, helping everyone but yourself, saying yes to everything. These grow like weeds, quick, loud, impressive at first glance, but they crowd out the deeper roots. They rob the soil. They leave you exhausted and hollow. True growth doesn't always look like success. Sometimes it looks like slowing down, saying no, sitting with discomfort instead of distracting from it, letting go of what's easy in order to build what's lasting. The tree doesn't rush to the sky. It anchors itself in darkness first, and when the storm comes, it stands. The weed, though fast, is fragile. Growth is not about how much you do, it's about what you're becoming. A person can be busy and empty, successful and lost. Surrounded and lonely. Motion means nothing without direction, and direction means nothing without depth. So pause, ask what's really growing in your life. Roots or weeds, substance or show. Not everything that moves is progress. Some things must slow down to truly rise. The softest touch leaves the deepest. The softest touch changes most impression. There's a power that doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention or leave trails of destruction. It doesn't bruise or dominate it. It simply arrives quietly, gently, and alters everything. The softest touch, often overlooked, carries a weight that lingers long after it's gone. A kind word at the right moment. A glance filled with understanding. A hand resting lightly on a shoulder when no words will do. These are the moments that carve into memory, not with force, but with depth. The world often rewards the loud, the aggressive, the bold, but the deepest changes rarely come from volume. They come from presence, a voice lowered instead of raised, a gesture made with care instead of control. These are the actions that bypass defenses and reach the center of a person's heart. They aren't remembered because they were grand. They are remembered because they were real, because they didn't need to prove anything to be felt. People carry wounds from harshness, but they heal from gentleness. A soft touch doesn't mean weakness. It means precision. It means knowing exactly where to press, how long to stay, and when to pull away. It means sensing what cannot be fixed with force. Some doors don't open with keys. They open with patience, with trust, with tenderness. And the irony is, what's soft often leaves the most permanent mark. Not the slap, but the embrace. Not the command, but the whisper. The softest touch isn't about how much pressure is applied. It's about how deeply it's received. And when someone remembers a moment that changed them, it's rarely the noise they recall. It's the silence, the softness, the gentle presence that reached them in ways no thunder ever could. The river bends, not because it is weak, but because it is flexibility over, force-wise. Strength is so often confused with resistance, with pushing forward, standing firm, refusing to yield. But the river teaches a different kind of power. It bends, it curves, it twists its path through rock and root and mountain, not because it is fragile, but because it understands that rigidity breaks, where flexibility endures. The river yields, and in doing so, it outlasts stone in a world obsessed with force. Surrender looks like failure. People are taught to push through, to dominate obstacles, to never back down. But some paths cannot be broken. Through some walls only fall when one flows around them. The river does not waste itself fighting. What it can simply move beyond that is not weakness. It is ancient intelligence. To bend is to adapt without losing yourself, to shift course without abandoning purpose. The river still reaches the sea. It never forgets where it's going, but it honors the terrain. It listens. It changes shape. Instead of resisting shape, that's the kind of strength that doesn't burn out. It deepens with every twist. People suffer because they mistake stubbornness for integrity. They hold tight to plans, to pride, to control. But when life throws sharp corners and steep drops, it's not the strongest who survive. It's the most fluid. Those who know how to bend without breaking, how to move without losing themselves. There is wisdom and in softness in choosing grace over force. The river could rage, but instead it sings. It could carve in violence, but instead it smooths with time. It teaches that the most powerful path is not the one that conquers, But the one that understands to bend is not to give in, it is to see, clearly to move wisely, to trust that arriving is not about straight lines. It's about staying in motion without losing your soul. An empty hand can hold more than one that grasps. Grasping feels safe. There's comfort in clinging to possessions, to people, to plans. The closed fist becomes a symbol of control, of having, of keeping, but the tighter it closes, the less room there is for anything new. The fingers curl inward, and in that tension, life stops flowing. An empty hand, on the other hand, looks vulnerable, exposed, but that openness is its strength, because only when the hand is empty can it truly receive. This is one of the most misunderstood truths in life. The world teaches accumulation. Gather more grip, harder, secure what you can before it slips away. But this mindset turns hands into cages. Love turns into possession. Dreams turn into desperation, and identity becomes tangled with what one can't let go of. But the more tightly something is held, the more fragile it becomes. Even water slips through clenched fingers. The empty hand isn't a sign of lack, it's a sign of readiness. It says, I trust that what is meant for me will arrive, and I don't need to choke the life out of it to keep it here. In its openness, the hand becomes a vessel, not just for receiving, but for offering, for connecting, for holding space without crushing what it touches. True richness isn't found in the grasp, it's found in the freedom to let go and still feel whole, because when the hand is open, it can hold more than things. It can hold peace, it can hold presence, it can hold the weight of another hand in need, and most importantly, it can hold the wisdom that having nothing to grip can sometimes mean having everything that matters. True, real wealth is wanting. Less wealth is the absence of craving. Most people believe wealth is something that can be counted, measured in coins, homes, achievements, admiration. But the ancients whispered a different truth, that real wealth isn't in what you possess, but in what you no longer need. The richest person isn't the one with the most, but the one who desires the least. Craving is a quiet thief. It disguises itself as ambition, as self-improvement, as love. But underneath, it's a hunger that never rests. You feed it with success, and it asks for more. You offer it attention, and it wants louder applause. It turns even the sweetest moments bitter, because they're never enough. A mind caught in craving cannot enjoy what it already has. It's always reaching, always leaning forward, always starving. The one who has tamed desire walks differently. There's a stillness in them, a presence. Their joy doesn't spike and crash. It hums. They don't chase status because their value isn't borrowed from others. They don't fear loss because they weren't gripping anything too tightly. To begin with, their wealth lives in contentment, not accumulation. Craving is exhausting. It keeps you running toward mirages. But the moment you stop chasing, something strange happens. You notice you're already standing in the oasis. You taste food differently. You breathe more deeply. You laugh without need. That's the wealth that can't be stolen or measured. It's not in the car, the title, the trophy. It's in the unshakable realization nothing is missing. To be free of craving is to be at peace in the middle of chaos. To wake up without needing more, to feel the sun on your skin and know it is enough. True wealth is not stored in banks or boxes. It lives in the quiet spaces between desires, and once it's found, no storm can touch it. He who listens learns twice. There's a kind of quiet intelligence listening as deep wisdom that doesn't need to speak first, doesn't rush to respond, doesn't interrupt to prove. It knows it simply listens deeply, not just to words, but to tone, to silence, to what's hidden between sentences. In that stillness, something powerful happens. The listener learns what's being said, and they also learn how and why it's being said. One lesson comes from the surface, the other comes from beneath it. That's why the one who truly listens learns twice. Most people don't really listen. They wait for a gap to talk a moment, to defend a pause, to insert their opinion. Their ears are open, but their mind is occupied, planning, judging, reacting. But real listening is different. It suspends the ego. It makes space. It forgets itself for a moment to absorb someone else's truth, and that space becomes a classroom. Every sentence a clue, every pause an opportunity. Listening doesn't just gather facts. It builds empathy. It reveals motives, fears, hopes, the quiet architecture behind every story. And when someone feels heard, they open, they reveal more, they trust, and suddenly the listener isn't just collecting knowledge, they're connecting to the experience behind it. There's wisdom that cannot be taught, only caught, and it floats inside conversations like smoke, easy to miss, but undeniable if you're still enough to feel it. The one who listens learns what happened and who it happened to. They learn the lesson and the life behind it. And in that doubled learning, they become not only wiser, but safer to speak to, safer to trust, because people always remember who truly listened. Speaking may prove what one knows, but listening reveals what one's ready to become, and the ear, humble and open, is often the sharpest teacher of them all. The path is not to be found, it is to be walked. So many wait for a sign, a perfect map, a feeling of certainty. Before they move, they search endlessly for purpose, for direction, for a life that feels right. But the truth is harder to swallow and more liberating to realize the path isn't something you discover. It's something you create with every step you take. There is no hidden trail waiting to be uncovered by the worthy. No perfect plan sit buried beneath the chaos of life. The myth of finding your path has paralyzed millions because they wait, analyze, hesitate, hoping the fog will clear before they begin. But the fog only lifts as you move through it. The path takes shape because you walked. The ancient ones understood this. They didn't wait for certainty. They acted, stumbled, learned, adjusted. They didn't ask, "Is this my destiny?" They asked, "What can I do today?" with courage. Each decision, each risk, each lesson that became the path, it was not found, it was forged. Hesitation feels safe, but it's the most dangerous trap of all, because in waiting for the right path, you give your life away in inches. You trade motion for imagining you stare at a closed door while your soul grows restless behind it. But once you begin, even if you're unsure, the road unfolds, it speaks back, it teaches, and step by step, the ground under your feet becomes sacred. You don't need more clarity to begin. You need more trust in your ability to shape meaning. As you move, the path will never appear fully paved. It responds to your presence, your action, your willingness to walk without knowing the destination, and in doing so, you discover something deeper. The journey was never about reaching a place. It was about becoming someone who walks a one candle lighting. Thousands single candle can light 1,000 more without losing itself. There is something profoundly beautiful in the quiet generosity of a flame. A single candle burning steady in the dark can touch another wick and another until the entire room is glowing. And yet in all this giving, the original flame does not weaken, it does not shrink, it remains whole, untouched in its power, even as it shares everything. This is not just about fire, it's about the human spirit. People often live like light is limited, like kindness is a resource to be rationed, or love something to be protected, or wisdom a secret to guard. There's this subtle fear that by giving too much, something essential will be lost, that if one gives their energy, their care, their support, they will burn out. But light doesn't work that way. Neither does truth, neither does love. When a candle lights another, it doesn't divide itself. It multiplies its impact. It becomes the reason others glow. That's how change spreads. That's how healing begins, not with grand gestures, but with quiet acts of presence. One person showing up, one voice offering comfort, one small act of goodness sparking another. The flame isn't afraid of darkness. It knows the dark has no substance, only absence, and so it gives freely, calmly, without condition. The more it shares, the more powerful it becomes, not because it grows larger, but because it awakens light everywhere it touches, and those who learn to live like this, unafraid to give, unafraid to shine, become something rare. They carry warmth into cold places. They remind others what's possible, and long after they're gone, their light remains. Because real impact isn't about how brightly one burns for themselves. It's about how many flames they dare to ignite. The mirror, clean the inner mirror that is never cleaned, forgets what it reflects. A mirror's purpose is simple, to reflect what is. But over time, if left untouched, dust gathers fingerprints, smudge, and the surface dulls. Eventually, it shows less of the truth and more of the grime. What was once a tool of clarity becomes a distorted surface, reflecting shadows instead of substance, and the mirror, though still present, forgets its purpose, not because it is broken, but because it has been neglected. The human mind works the same way, born with the ability to perceive truth, to reflect on life with clarity, compassion, and wisdom. It slowly accumulates the residue of noise, old beliefs, unresolved pain, constant distraction, unchecked thoughts. These build up like dust on glass, and without inner cleaning, without silence, without reflection, the mind forgets what it is meant to see. It becomes reactive, cloudy, lost. The tragedy is quiet. A person goes through life convinced they're seeing clearly, when in fact, every image is being filtered through layers of distortion. Judgment replaces understanding, fear clouds joy. The past warps the present, and soon the self that once knew how to reflect light becomes a surface for old stories to repeat themselves. But cleaning the mirror is always possible. It doesn't require perfection, just presence, just the willingness to pause and see what's actually being reflected, and to ask whether it's still true. Meditation, honesty, rest, stillness. These are the cloths that restore the shine, not by adding anything new, but by removing what never belonged. A mirror doesn't need to invent the light. It only needs to stay clean enough to let it pass through, and when it does, the reflection returns not as something you create, but something you remember, a clarity that was always there, waiting to be revealed. The deepest, deep silence holds. Clear sound, cave often holds the clearest sound. There's something haunting about depth, something both terrifying and magnetic. People fear it because it's dark, quiet, unknown, but that depth, that silence, that stillness doesn't just swallow sound. It perfects it in the deepest caves, where the air is untouched and the world above falls away. Even the softest whisper echoes like truth. Their sound is stripped of noise. Nothing muffles it. Nothing competes. It becomes pure, honest, undeniable. The deeper the cave, the clearer the echo. The same is true of people, the ones who've descended into themselves, who've sat in their pain, wrestled with their fears, made peace with solitude, speak differently. Their words don't try to impress. They don't speak to fill space. They speak when something needs to be said, and when they do, it lands because their voice doesn't come from the surface. It rises from depth, from experience, from truth that's been earned in silence. In a world addicted to volume, depth gets overlooked. People chase attention with noise, louder, faster, more, but clarity doesn't come from shouting. It comes from stillness. The deepest insights are not screamed. They're felt. They echo through the soul, not because they demand, but because they resonate. And like the cave, the human heart becomes more honest. The deeper it goes, shallow waters ripple with every disturbance. But at the bottom, where the world is, still, Truth becomes clear, that's where the real voice waits. The one not shaped by ego or fear, but by time and reflection. So if the world ever falls silent around you, if life feels like a descent into some unseen cavern, don't panic. Listen, what echoes back might be the clearest sound you've ever heard. Not because it's new, but because you finally reached the place quiet enough to hear it. It is better to sit with a sitting with fools or the clever fool in silence than to argue with the clever. In haste, there is a kind of wisdom that doesn't seek to win, it seeks to understand, and sometimes that wisdom says nothing at all. To sit with a fool in silence might seem like a waste of time, but it is peace disguised as patience. The fool may talk nonsense or nothing at all, but in silence no harm is done. The mind remains still, the heart unprovoked, but to argue with the clever in haste is to walk into a fire with dry skin. Cleverness without calm is dangerous. It doesn't seek truth, it seeks victory. It twists words, escalates tension, and feeds the ego. The conversation becomes a battlefield, and both walk away, wounded, more entrenched, less clear, more certain of being right, but further from what matters. Haste is the enemy of clarity. Even the most brilliant thoughts, when spoken too quickly, become blades. Ideas need space to breathe. Truth needs silence to rise. And when two clever minds collide in a hurry, it becomes a race, not a dialogue. Words are fired, not felt points are scored, but no one grows. The fool in silence may teach nothing, but they demand nothing. They leave you with your own thoughts, with your own breath. And sometimes that is more valuable than the most articulate argument, because silence invites reflection, haste invites regret. Not every debate deserves your energy. Not every provocation needs a response. To walk away, to breathe, to choose stillness over cleverness. That is not weakness, that is mastery. The wise know that the cost of a rushed argument is often the truth itself, and they would rather sit in stillness than drown in the noise of cleverness used without the spider and quiet creation care. The spider does not ask if its web is perfect. It simply spins. There's something deeply humbling about the way a spider works. It doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It doesn't seek approval. It doesn't second-guess the design. It simply spins thread by thread, silently, diligently, without ceremony, and sometimes the wind tears it down, sometimes a branch breaks it, sometimes it catches nothing, but the spider spins again, not because it's certain of success, but because spinning is what it was born to do. Humans, unlike spiders, are burdened with the weight of doubt. Before creating anything, there's hesitation. Is it good enough? Will people like it? Is it worth doing if it isn't perfect? So many never begin, not because they can't, but because they're waiting for certainty. Perfection becomes the prison, and in that cell, nothing is built, nothing is shared, nothing is lived, but the spider knows better. It doesn't measure the symmetry before starting. It doesn't ask if the light hits it just right. It moves with instinct, with rhythm, with quiet commitment, and the result, a web that captures more than prey. It captures the essence of what it means to do without overthinking, to create without apology. There's wisdom in forgetting the outcome and focusing on the act. The spider doesn't chase validation. Its web is its presence, its offering, and that's enough, because perfection isn't in the flawless design, it's in the persistence, the patience, the silent courage to keep going. Some webs will break, some will be ignored, but each one teaches the fingers where to weave next, and that's the real artistry, not in waiting to be perfect, but in spinning again and again until something sticks, not because it's flawless, but because it exists. One who, embracing the shadow self, dances with their shadow, never dances alone. There is a part of every person that hides in the quiet, a shape just behind the smile, a flicker behind the confidence, a silence under the noise, the shadow not evil, not broken, just the pieces disowned the anger, swallowed the fear, buried the grief denied most. Run from it, they flood their days with distractions. They build lives that shine on the outside, hoping the shadow won't catch up, but it always does. To dance with, it is something entirely different. It is not submission, it is courage. It's the moment one stops pretending to be only light and welcomes the parts they were told to hide. It's sitting with the wound and saying, I see you. It's hearing the voice of doubt and whispering, you belong too. When you dance with your shadow, you are no longer alone, because for the first time, every part of you is invited to move together. People think healing is about erasing the darkness, but the soul doesn't seek perfection. It seeks wholeness, and wholeness means taking your shadow by the hand, letting it show you where you've been fractured, letting it remind you that pain has shaped you, not ruined you. That fear once kept you alive. That shame once tried to protect you. When the shadow is no longer a threat, it becomes a partner, and so the dance begins, awkward, honest, unscripted, but real in that movement. Something shifts. You stop fighting yourself. You stop running. You become less afraid of being seen, because now you have seen yourself, and the one who has done that never walks alone again. Not because they are surrounded, but because they are whole. Every step becomes more grounded, every breath more true, because they are no longer performing. They are dancing. The falcon soars is highest when it lets go of the surrendering, the hunt need to hunt. There's a freedom in flight that most will never taste. A falcon doesn't rise to conquer it, rises to feel the wind press beneath its wings. When it stops chasing, when it's no longer gripped by hunger or driven by survival. It doesn't lose power, it finds it, because the highest flight isn't about the hunt, it's about surrender. The falcon climbs, not to catch, but to become one with the sky, and in that stillness, that letting go, it reaches heights it could never touch, while bound to need humans are taught to pursue, to chase goals, a success validation, more always more. The hunt becomes identity, achievement becomes air. But in that chase, something sacred is lost. The sky becomes a battleground instead of a home life, becomes a race instead of a rhythm. And no matter how high the flight, the heart remains tethered to what it must have rather than what it already is. But when the falcon stops needing, it stops grasping, and when it stops grasping, it begins to float. It trusts the current, it lets the wind lift it, and ironically, that's when it soars as the highest, not when it's focused on the prey below, but when it forgets the ground entirely. That is the secret of true elevation detachment. There's a kind of rise that comes not from force, but from surrender, not from domination, but from alignment. The falcon doesn't prove its strength by what it catches, but by how effortlessly it rides the unseen air. And humans too can touch those skies, not by hungering for more, but by letting go of what they thought they needed. That's when the soul soars, when the hunger fades and the sky finally opens. What is built slowly lasts longer than what is rushed into builds slowly. Endure. Strongly existence in a world addicted to speed. Slowness is mistaken for failure. People want results. Now love, now success, now clarity. Now but the things that truly matter cannot be microwaved into meaning. They take time, friction, patience. The roots that hold a tree through storms aren't grown in a day. The deepest connections aren't sparked, they're nurtured, and the kind of strength that doesn't collapse under pressure is forged slowly. Not instantly rushing creates the illusion of progress, but speed often skips the foundations. A relationship that feels electric but never faces silence will crack. A career built on shortcuts instead of skill will tremble when challenged. Even self-worth, when manufactured through achievements, will collapse the moment the applause fades without depth. There is no durability, and depth requires time. The things that endure are the things that are crafted layer by layer, with care, with pauses, with setbacks that are not failures, but part of the shaping a house that takes longer to build will stand longer. A life that evolves through stillness and reflection will not shatter in noise, and a person who allows themselves to unfold slowly will carry a strength that can't be faked. But this kind of building is quiet, unseen. It doesn't give dopamine spikes. It doesn't impress at first glance, and that's why it's rare. Most abandon it for faster paths. But those who stay, those who choose, the slow rise over the fast burn. They create something unshakable, a peace that isn't dependent on circumstance, a joy that isn't borrowed, a self that isn't hollow. What is built slowly becomes sacred, not because it's perfect, but because it was chosen repeatedly, patiently. That kind of existence doesn't just survive, it endures long after the rushed and the loud have faded into dust. Wisdom is not what is added, but what is wisdom is in simplicity removed. People often confuse wisdom with accumulation, more books, more quotes, more strategies, more tools. There's a belief that the wise are those who know the most, speak the longest, fill rooms with knowledge. But real wisdom doesn't come from stacking information like bricks. It comes from chiseling away everything that isn't essential, like a sculptor revealing the form hidden inside stone. Wisdom is what remains when the noise is stripped away. The child asks 100 questions. The student fills their notebook. The expert explains in detail, but the wise person listens, pauses, then speaks a single sentence that changes everything, not because it's complex, but because it's clean, because it's been refined in the fire of experience and emptied of all that's unnecessary in life. People carry so much assumptions, fears, opinions inherited, not earned rules. They never questioned rules they never chose, and these layers weigh them down, fog their clarity, and clutter their minds. But wisdom doesn't ask for more. It asks what can be let go, which beliefs no longer serve, which voices are echoes of someone else, which truths are no longer true. The wise know that understanding deepens as the clutter fades, that silence often reveals more than explanation, that clarity comes not from finding the right answer, but from letting go of the wrong questions. Wisdom is the space left behind after the ego is quiet, after the pride has been humbled, after the need to prove is gone. It's in the emptiness that truth rings loudest, in the stillness that the answer finally fits, and when the last unnecessary piece falls away, what remains is not more, but less illusion, less resistance, less noise, and that is where wisdom begins. The lion does not roar to prove it is strong, it simply walks. True strength doesn't announce itself, it doesn't posture, demand, or shout. The lion king of the wild doesn't need to prove what it is. It doesn't pace the plains looking for applause. It doesn't roar to validate its place. It simply moves calmly, deliberately, and with presence, and in that quiet, confidence. Everything around it listens, but humans have forgotten this. In a world of noise, strength has become performance. People raise their voices to be heard. They flaunt success to be admired. They defend themselves, constantly afraid that silence will be mistaken for weakness. But real power doesn't react to doubt. It doesn't need witnesses. It is known from within. The loudest in the room is often the most unsure. Roaring is easy, especially when fueled by fear, by ego, by insecurity, but walking steady, grounded, without the need for attention, that requires a deeper kind of power, one that isn't swayed by praise or threatened by silence, one that doesn't collapse when unseen. The lion's strength is in its restraint. It doesn't chase every threat. It doesn't waste energy proving itself. It knows what it is, and that knowing shapes its every move. That's what makes it powerful. Not the roar, but the stillness behind it. To live like this is to reclaim dignity, to stop reacting, to stop justifying your worth, to move through the world with a quiet force that doesn't need validation. When you walk like the lion, people feel it, not because you're loud, but because you're real, and in a world of desperate noise, nothing is more commanding than someone who no longer needs to roar the when knocking ends. Doors open. Door opens when the knocking ceases. There's a kind of desperation in repeated knocking, a fist pounding again and again louder, each time demanding an answer, a response, an entry. It's the sound of the anxious mind of the heart that can't stand silence, that mistakes noise for progress. But there is a strange truth tucked quietly behind that door. It doesn't open to noise. It opens to stillness. It waits not for effort, but for surrender. The door opens when the knocking ceases. So many people beg for change, chase clarity, demand outcomes. They knock on love, on purpose, on healing with clenched fists and frantic hearts. But the more they pound, the tighter the door seems to stay shut, because the door doesn't respond to force. It doesn't open for those who try to break it down. It opens for those who learn to wait, to listen, to stop hammering their wants against what needs time to become ready. Knocking as action stopping is trust. It's the moment you step back and realize that no amount of effort will force the timing to bend to your will, that silence isn't rejection, it's incubation, that sometimes it's not the world saying no, it's the world asking you to be still long enough to receive what's already on its way. And in that stillness, something shifts. The heart softens, the breath slows, the demand fades, and often without warning, without fanfare, the door kicks open. Not because you earned it with noise, but because you finally became quiet enough to walk through the lesson was never in the knocking. It was in what happened when the need to knock disappeared, when the fight to be let in became the peace of knowing you were already at the threshold. The leaf that falls returns to the root at first glance, a falling leaf. The sacred cycle of falling seems like the end of something. It drifts downward away from the branch that once held it away from the sunlight that once nourished it. It looks like loss. It looks like surrender. But the truth is more profound. The fall is not an ending. It's a return. Because when the leaf touches the earth, it begins to break down, to soften, to dissolve. And in doing so, it feeds the very root it once grew from. This is the quiet cycle of life that most miss, that nothing is truly lost, that what falls away becomes nourishment, that even decay has a purpose, the things people let go of, relationships, identities, dreams don't vanish into nothing. They sink into the soil of experience. They enrich the ground of the soul. They prepare it for deeper growth. But it's hard to see that while falling, people cling to the branch, terrified of change, desperate to stay in bloom. They see loss as failure, letting go as weakness. But the leaf knows better. It knows that the letting go is sacred. It knows that the root will need what it becomes. It trusts the descent to fall doesn't mean to break. It means to return to truth, to humility, to what truly matters. The root never forgets the leaf, and the leaf, even in its descent, carries the memory of where it came from. The bond is never broken. It just transforms. So when something in your life falls, let it, when a season ends, release it. The fall is not punishment. It's part of the cycle, and the deeper the fall, the richer the soil. The root is waiting not to mourn you, but to be fed by you, because even in death, the leaf gives life. Stillness is not the absence of movement, but the presence of balance. Stillness is so often misunderstood. People imagine it as frozen, passive, inert, as doing nothing, as being still, like a statue, but true stillness isn't lifeless. It's alive in a way that few things are. It doesn't come from stopping movement. It comes from aligning everything within that movement. A tree sways in the wind, yet remains rooted. A dancer spins, yet their center never falters. That is stillness. Not the lack of motion, but the quiet harmony inside it. The world never stops moving. Life never stops demanding thoughts. Come emotions, rise circumstances shift, and people chase. Stillness by trying to escape it all. Disconnect, retreat, numb. But escape is not stillness real. Stillness is when all the chaos can swirl around you, and yet your center stays unshaken. It's when your breath moves, your heart beats, your thoughts flow. Balance in movement, but none of it pulls you off balance. It's a kind of inner posture, one that doesn't resist life, but receives it without tipping over. Stillness isn't silence. It's the ability to hear clearly through the noise. It's not stopping the river, it's becoming the calm part of the current, and the ones who master this don't look motionless. They just move differently, with grace, with presence, with control that doesn't grip, but flows. There is a sacred kind of power in a person who has found their still point. You feel it in the way they speak, the way they pause, the way they don't chase every distraction, don't react to every pull, because their stillness isn't fragile, it's anchored, and the more the world moves, the deeper they drop into it. That is not absence, that is mastery, the presence of balance in a moving world. Forgiving first is strength. The one who forgives first is the strongest. Forgiveness is often mistaken for surrender, for letting someone off the hook, for pretending the pain wasn't real, but true. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is an act of immense strength. It requires one to do something that pride resists, that anger clings to, and that ego wants to delay release. Not because the other deserves it, but because you deserve peace. To forgive first is to reclaim your power before it becomes poison. It means choosing to no longer be ruled by the wound, because every moment spent holding a grudge is a moment you carry the weight of someone else's actions. Bitterness is heavy resentment, builds walls, and though it may feel like protection, it's a prison made of your own refusal to heal. The one who forgives first doesn't lose. They lead, they interrupt the cycle. They say, I will not continue this war inside me just to prove I was right. They recognize that forgiveness isn't saying the pain didn't happen. It's saying it no longer controls the narrative. That's power, that's strength, that's freedom. Waiting for an apology is easy. It's passive. It lets time harden the heart while pretending it's standing firm. But stepping forward without permission from the past, that's rare, that's revolutionary. It means you've made peace more important than pride, healing more important than history. Forgiveness doesn't always come with closure. It doesn't guarantee reconciliation. It may not even be noticed by the one who hurt you, but it is noticed by your spirit. It feels the weight, drop the breath, or return. The heart open again to forgive. First is not to forget. It is to remember who you are beneath the wound, strong enough to feel, to release, and to rise without dragging the past behind you. That kind of strength isn't loud, but it is unshakable. The body ages, but the breath is forever. Young is always young. Time carves itself into. The body lines form joints, ache, muscles tire. The mirror becomes a quiet reminder that nothing physical escapes change, and yet amid the slow and certain march of age, there's one thing that doesn't wrinkle the breath. The same breath that entered the lungs on the very first day still enters now, untouched by years, unchanged by calendars. It doesn't grow old. It just is ageless, eternal, always. Now the breath is the thread that ties each moment to the next, while the body bends under time's weight. The breath remains light-free, undiminished. It doesn't lose rhythm the way steps do. It doesn't forget the way memory does. It's as youthful in an old man as it is in a newborn, because the breath doesn't belong to the body. It belongs to the life moving through it, and yet so many ignore it. Chase youth in creams and surgeries, in desperation to pause the inevitable, but real youth, true vitality has never been in the skin. It's in the awareness of the breath, in remembering that no matter how much time has passed this moment, this inhale is as fresh and full as the very first. The wise don't chase youth, they return to it through the breath. They know that every deep inhale is a reset, and every slow exhale is a surrender, that inside the rhythm of breathing lives the one thing time cannot touch: presence, because the body is the house, but the breath is the light that moves through every room, and while the walls may crack and the doors may creak, the light remains the same, bright, quiet, forever young. The mountain does not speak, yet all who pass learn from it. There is a kind of wisdom that needs no words, a presence so complete, so unmoved that it teaches without trying. The mountain doesn't explain itself. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't defend its existence. It simply is immense, still, and silent, and somehow in that silence, it changes those who come near people, climb it for glory, for challenge, for clarity. They bring their noise, their ambitions, their fears, their stories, and by the time they reach its peak, something has shifted, not because the mountain gave them answers, but because it didn't. It offered space, it offered perspective, and in its stillness, people heard themselves more clearly. That's the paradox. The most powerful teachers often say the least. The mountain doesn't judge it, doesn't flatter. It simply reflects what is brought to it. The tired feel their weakness, the proud feel small, the restless feel stillness for the first time. It holds a mirror without distortion, and those who are willing to listen to silence leave with something louder than any speech could give. To be like the mountain is to know your presence is enough, that you don't have to argue to be wise, that truth doesn't need to shout, that sometimes just standing firmly, being rooted, being real is the most instructive thing you can do. People feel it. They sense what you carry, and often your silence teaches more than your opinions ever could not. Everyone who passes the mountain understands it. Some rush past, focus only on the summit, but those who pause, who sit with its silence, who breathe with it, they leave changed. Not because the mountain spoke, but because it didn't need to. In its stillness, they finally heard what mattered: let go or be dragged. Some things don't break cleanly: a relationship, a memory, a dream that didn't unfold the way it should have. They cling like barbed wire, sharp, let go or be dragged, painful and deceptively familiar, and yet even as they bleed, the soul dry, people hold on out of fear, out of habit, out of the lie that maybe, just maybe, things will go back to the way they were. But there's a moment, quiet, undeniable, when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. If it's not released, it will pull you under, let go, or be dragged. The dragging is subtle at first, a heaviness in the chest, a tension in the jaw, thoughts that circle like vultures around what can't be changed. But over time, the weight grows. It shows up in sleepless nights, strained relationships, a constant feeling of being behind, in a life that's still moving forward without permission, because pain doesn't pause just because someone refuses to release it. It tightens its grip, it digs in deeper. Letting go isn't forgetting, it's not pretending it didn't matter. It's choosing not to let what hurt you own you. It's releasing the illusion that you must carry every wound, every failure, every ghost. And yes, it feels like loss, but it's not the loss of something that was ever meant to stay. It's the loss of a chain. Freedom doesn't come from holding on tighter. It comes from the courage to unclench, to stop dragging the weight of what isn't yours anymore, to stop being pulled across a life you're no longer living. Letting go is not weakness. It is the ultimate act of power. The moment you stop being the prisoner of the past and become the author of what comes next. because you can't fly while being dragged, and you weren't made to crawl. The more one speaks of wisdom, the further it drifts. There's a paradox hidden in wisdom. It resists being captured the moment it's spoken. Too often, too loudly, too eagerly, it begins to dissolve like a mist. Disturbed by motion, it slips away just as the hand reaches for it. True wisdom doesn't need to be advertised. It doesn't scream through lectures or flood conversation with cleverness. It sits quietly in presence, in restraint, in knowing when to be silent. The more it is spoken of, the more it becomes about the speaker, and the further it drifts from truth in a world obsessed with sharing insights, packaging advice, and branding. Enlightenment wisdom has become a performance, but real wisdom has no ego. It doesn't rush to be quoted. It doesn't ask to be admired. It's lived, not displayed, and the ones who truly carry it often say the least. Not because they lack words, but because they've seen how words often fail. Wisdom is felt more than heard. It lives in the tone of voice that doesn't rise, in the eyes that listen before judging, in the decisions made without needing applause. It's passed in glances, pauses, quiet actions that ripple deeper than any speech. But when it's over-explained, overshared, dissected to death, it becomes philosophy, not truth information, not transformation. The wise don't try to own wisdom. They let it visit briefly, like a bird landing on the shoulder before flying off. They know the moment they try to hold it too tightly or wrap it in words, it begins to vanish, because wisdom isn't something you carry in your mouth. It's something that shapes your being, and so it drifts not out of reach, but out of performance. It hides where words cannot follow, waiting for those who no longer need to talk about it to finally understand. There are no shortcuts to the top of a sacred mountain. The sacred mountain calls to something deeper than ambition. It calls to the soul. It isn't just a peak to be conquered. It's a path meant to transform. But the modern mind wants speed. It wants the summit without the steps, the reward without the struggle, the wisdom without the walk. Yet there are no shortcuts on this kind of journey. Every step must be earned. Every lesson must be lived. People try to bypass the climb. They chase gurus, hacks 5-step formulas to enlightenment. They want the clarity, the peace, the strength now, but the sacred mountain doesn't bend to impatience. It demands presence. It humbles the prideful. It tests the heart. And for those who try to skip the path, it offers nothing in return, because it's not about the summit. It's about who you become on the way up, the doubts you face, the truths you can't unsee, the moments you fall to your knees. Not because you failed, but because something inside you broke open. That is the sacredness, not the view at the top, but the quiet deaths and rebirths that happen in the silence between each step. The sacred mountain doesn't care how fast you move. It cares how deeply, whether your feet kiss the earth with reverence, whether your breath is real, whether you can sit with yourself in the cold and hear something other than your fear shortcuts steal that they give the illusion of progress, but rob you of the strength and clarity that only come from the climb, to walk slowly, honestly, step by step. That is the path. There's no helicopter to wisdom, no elevator to the soul, only the mountain, only the silence, and only the one willing to keep rising, even when no one's watching, even when the peak is hidden in clouds. To be without need is to be without need, is to be free, to possess everything. Need creates the illusion of emptiness. It whispers that something is missing, that happiness is just one achievement, one relationship, one possession away. It paints life as a ladder, always with another rung, and so people climb, they chase, they hunger, they grip tightly to what they believe will complete them. But the more they need, the more they feel they lack, and the more they chase, the more distant peace becomes. In truth, to be without need is not to have less. It is to lack nothing. It is to possess everything that truly matters. The mind tethered to desire can never rest. It burns with comparison, aches with expectation, breaks under disappointment. But when the flame of need dies down, what remains is astonishing clarity, contentment, enoughness. A person who is free from need walks through the world unburdened, not because they have everything, but because they've realized they are everything. The storm of craving has passed, and in its silence, everything is already present. Without need, joy returns to simple places, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of breath, a conversation untainted by wanting a moment, untouched by striving. Suddenly, what was always overlooked becomes luminous, and the person no longer chasing finally sees what was there all along. This isn't about renunciation. It's about recognition. It's about seeing how much energy is spent believing something's missing. It's about discovering that the hunger was never for things but for peace. And peace doesn't come when every desire is fulfilled. It comes when the need to desire vanishes. To be without need is to live from fullness, not from lack. It is to move through life like a cup already overflowing, and from that place. Even the smallest moment becomes everything because it is everything and nothing more is required. The wolf howls, honesty over approval. Not to be heard, but because it must. The howl of a wolf pierces the night, not for applause, not for recognition, not to prove its power, but because something inside demands to be released. It is not performance, it is instinct, a raw, unfiltered truth that rises from the chest and splits the silence. The wolf doesn't ask if anyone is listening. It howls because it would be unbearable not to. There's a lesson in that for the human soul, in a world obsessed with being seen, validated, and affirmed. Expression has become decoration. People speak not always from truth, but from expectation. They tailor their voices to fit trends, to win approval, to avoid rejection. But the deepest parts of the self cannot be filtered. They ache, they burn, and like the wolf, they must be released not to be admired, but to stay alive. Real expression, the kind that comes from the core, is messy. It's not always beautiful or clever or marketable. It might tremble, it might cry, it might roar, but it's real, and that's what makes it sacred. The wolf does not care if the night understands its cry. It just knows the silence would be more painful than the vulnerability when a person speaks, creates loves or grieves from that place, from the unedited heart. They are not asking the world to echo back approval. They are simply honoring what must move through them. That is strength, that is freedom to stop waiting for permission to feel, to stop shaping truth into something safe. The howl is not a request, it is a release, and those who dare to speak from that same wild honesty, whether heard or not, live a life that is not hollow. They become whole, not by being understood, but by being true. The sky never resists the cloud. The sky does not resist, simply waits. The sky doesn't flinch when storms gather. It doesn't fight the fog or chase away the dark. It doesn't beg the cloud to leave or demand the sun to stay. It holds it all calm, vast, undisturbed, because the sky understands what so many forget. Clouds pass, they always do. Some linger longer, some arrive heavy with rain, some thunder and break, but none of them stay, and the sky in its endless patience simply waits. Human beings, on the other hand, wrestle the clouds. The mind storms against sadness, fear, uncertainty, treating each difficult emotion as something to be solved, erased, pushed away. But the more it's resisted, the more it spreads, the more it's feared, the heavier it becomes. The soul becomes cramped by the refusal to feel. But if it learned from the sky, it would know presence is not resistance, and peace isn't found in control. It's found in spaciousness. Waiting doesn't mean weakness, it means wisdom. It's the understanding that emotions are whether not identity, that what covers the light cannot extinguish it. The sky is never diminished by what passes through it, nor are you to be like. The sky is to allow, to let the storm enter without losing yourself to it, to feel the cloud without collapsing beneath it, and to know without rushing that light always returns, not because it was fought for, but because it was never truly gone. The sky doesn't need to clear the way, it just keeps being sky open, still infinite, and in time every cloud moves on, not because it was resisted, but because it was allowed. You cannot read the stars while staring at your own footprints. There's a certain kind of blindness that comes from looking only at where you've been. When the eyes are fixed downward on every misstep, every regret, every scar they miss. The vastness above the stars don't live in the past. They don't exist in the rut of overthinking, or the grooves of old wounds. They hang in silence and perspective, in the kind of clarity that only reveals itself when you look up. But people become obsessed with their footprints. They trace them over and over, trying to make sense of the journey. They analyze every wrong turn, every mistake, as if understanding the past will guarantee the future. And while reflection can teach, it can also trap, because staring too long at the path behind you can blind you to where you're meant to go. The stars offer something the footprints never can: direction, possibility, wonder. They remind you that you are part of something larger than your mistakes, that your life is not confined to the choices you've already made, that there's more beyond the loop of memory and guilt. But to see them, you have to lift your gaze. You have to stop worshiping your own history and open yourself to something bigger. Footprints tell you where you've been. The stars show you where you could go. One is closed and done, the other is infinite. And the tragedy is that many never look up. They walk with their head down, convinced they are lost, while the entire sky is screaming a quiet invitation. There is more to read. The stars is to stop defining yourself by your past. It is to be led by vision, not memory. And sometimes all it takes is the courage to stop looking down, even though the moon knows when to rest. Moon rests in darkness half its time. The moon is admired for its glow, its calm light, its quiet beauty in the night sky. It pulls tides, stirs dreams, and offers comfort to those wandering through shadow. But what most forget is that even the moon, radiant as it is, spends half its life unseen, half its cycle cloaked in darkness, and yet it does not rush to shine again. It does not panic when hidden. It rests. It disappears without fear, because it knows darkness is not disappearance. It is part of becoming whole in a world obsessed with constant visibility. With shining always, there's little room left for retreat. People measure their worth by how brightly they burn, how consistently they perform, how often they're seen, but nature tells another story, one of cycles, not constancy. The moon reminds us that brilliance doesn't mean never fading, that rest is not failure, that withdrawal is not weakness. Even when unseen, the moon is still the moon. It doesn't stop being itself. When hidden, it simply allows the night to hold it, without needing to prove its light, and so must we. There are times to shine, to show up, to radiate, but there are also times to dim, to pull back, to sit in the quiet of ourselves without explanation. The darkness is not a punishment, it's a passage, a place where light gathers strength again, a time for silence, reflection, restoration, and the one who learns to rest like the moon does not fear being unseen. They know their worth is not in constant light, but in the rhythm of return, because just like the moon, we are not meant to glow endlessly. We are meant to breathe in phases, to trust the darkness, to know that even when the world can't see us, we are still full still, whole still, becoming a bird. You don't need a reason to sing, does not need a reason to sing. The bird doesn't sing for applause. It doesn't ask if its voice matters. It doesn't check the time or wait for permission. It simply sings because it is alive, because the sun has risen, because there is breath in its lungs. The melody pours from its chest, not to be heard, but because it cannot be contained. That's the freedom Most forget how to live with humans, unlike the bird, often feel they must justify their joy, that happiness must be earned, that expression must have a purpose. They silence themselves, waiting for a perfect moment for approval, for the fear to pass, but life doesn't wait. And the deepest songs, the ones that heal, that connect, that awaken, come not from a plan, but from presence. There is something sacred about doing what the soul longs to do, without asking why, laughing for no reason, creating without a goal, loving without calculation. These are the notes that make a life sing, but too often they are buried under shoulds and shame, and striving people forget that being alive is reason enough. The bird sings, even when no one is listening. It doesn't measure its voice against others. It doesn't wonder if it deserves to be heard. It just lets the song rise, trusting that its very existence is worth celebrating. That's not foolishness, that's wisdom. The kind that knows the sound of the heart is more important than the sound of the world. To live like that is to return to something primal, to know that you don't need a reason to feel joy, to dance in the kitchen, to write a line of poetry, to say something kind. You need only to let what's within you rise, because like the bird, your song was never meant to be justified. It was meant to be lived. Water teaches more than fire. It enters. Water teaches through softness silently and reshapes the world. Fire gets the glory. It roars. It dazzles. It consumes. It demands to be witnessed, and for a moment it feels unstoppable. But fire burns out. It leaves ash, destruction, silence after noise. Water, on the other hand, does not need to scream. It doesn't explode. It seeps. It waits. It moves through cracks, settles in corners, touches everything without needing to dominate, and slowly, without permission or applause, it changes the shape of the world. A river doesn't argue with the mountain. It doesn't try to break it apart in a day. It touches it gently over and over, year after year, until the rock bends, until the unmovable is moved. That's the way water teaches, through persistence, not power, through softness, not force. Its lesson is not how to conquer, but how to endure and transform without violence. People chase fire. They chase intensity, quick results, visible triumph. But most of life is water, not flame. It's slow healing, quiet strength, invisible shifts. A broken heart doesn't mend with a spark. It mends with time, like a stream smoothing stone. Real growth happens in the moments no one sees, when patience replaces urgency, when gentleness takes root where anger used to live. Water enters where nothing else can. It adapts, it reflects, it nourishes, and yet it carves canyons and drowns empires. Its silence is not weakness, it is wisdom, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself to change everything it touches. To live like water is to learn that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to fight to be strong. You don't have to burn to leave a mark. You just have to keep flowing, keep showing up, keep touching the world until it changes, without ever losing your calm. The wise sleep with one eye on the inside to the outside world. The wise may appear calm, quiet, even asleep, but beneath that stillness something remains deeply awake, not watchful of danger, but of self. One eye turned inward, gently observing the mind's movements, the heart's impulses, the subtle shifts of emotion that pass unnoticed by most. They rest, but they do not drift. They dream, but they are not lost. Their peace is not unconscious, it is alert. Most people sleep, not just at night, but through life. They react, obey, consume, repeat days. Blur thoughts come and go without being questioned. Desires arise and are chased without understanding where they come from. This is the sleep of the unexamined life, a comfort that numbs instead of heals. But the wise do something different, even when the body softens, even when the eyes close. Part of them remains aware, not paranoid present. It's a subtle thing, a whisper inside that keeps asking, what is this really? Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. The wise don't just live, they witness. They don't just think, they notice the shape and texture of thought itself, and in the witnessing they stay grounded. Even in the dream, the eye on the inside doesn't judge, it doesn't interfere. It simply sees. It is the part of you that watches yourself react and asks if that reaction is old or true. It's the quiet clarity that feels the rise of anger and chooses not to feed it. It's the presence that hears the voice of doubt and doesn't mistake it for truth. The wise know that waking life is also a kind of sleep, and sleep too can be part of awakening. So they rest, but not blindly. They live, but not unconsciously, because part of them never forgets. The deepest danger is not outside, it's falling asleep within. Let the dust settle. Only wait for the dust to settle, then will the path be clear. Clarity never arrives in chaos. When the dust is stirred, when thoughts race, when emotions flare like sandstorms in the heart, everything becomes clouded. Decisions feel urgent, or reactions feel necessary, but what's seen in the middle of the storm is rarely the truth. It's distortion magnified by confusion. The mind tries to act while the dust is still in the air, chasing certainty in a moment built for stillness. But the truth is simple and ancient. Let the dust settle, only then will the path be clear. Life has a way of kicking up storms. A single word can unearth years of buried fear. A loss can shatter structure. A moment of uncertainty can fill the entire horizon. And in that haze, people grasp at answers, at fixes, at anything that feels like control. But nothing grounded comes from that space. The choices made in panic rarely serve the long road. Stillness is not stagnation, it's wisdom. It's knowing that what feels urgent isn't always important. That clarity is not pulled from the storm, it's revealed after the storm. The dust must fall, the air must clear, the noise must quiet. Only then can you see where you're actually standing and where you need to go next. Letting the dust settle is an act of trust. It's patience in the face of pressure. It's refusing to move just to feel movement. And in that pause, in that deep breath, after the whirlwind, the path that once seemed impossible appears with quiet certainty. The storm always passes, the dust always falls, but rushing through the fog only leads to more confusion. Wait, breathe, stand still, because the ground beneath you hasn't changed. Only your view of it has, and when the dust clears, it's all there, every step, every stone, exactly where it was meant to be. The greatest teacher is the one who, the greatest teachers disappear, vanishes after the lesson. Not every teacher stays, not every guide walks beside you forever. Some enter your life like a passing shadow, brief, quiet, uncelebrated, and leave behind something far greater than their presence, transformation. They don't demand loyalty, don't ask to be followed, don't stay to be admired. They offered a lesson, then disappear, trusting that what you needed has already been planted. This is what makes them great. They don't become a crutch, they don't tether you to their voice, they don't seek to be remembered. They seek for you to remember yourself. Their gift is not in how long they remain, but in how deeply their presence reshaped the way you walk. Once they're gone, they are like wind to a flame. Not the fire itself, but the force that helped it catch. Most crave teachers who stay, who reassure, who confirm. But the best ones teach you how to stop asking, how to stand without leaning, how to trust your own feet. They make themselves unnecessary. They vanish not out of neglect, but out of knowing. The final part of the lesson is learning to walk alone. Sometimes the teacher is a person, sometimes a heartbreak, sometimes a failure that cracked you open. You think you need it to last forever, but permanence is not the measure of impact. Presence is, and the ones who vanish after the lesson, they teach the most important truth of all, that the lesson was never about them. It was about what they awakened in you. The greatest teacher doesn't leave a shrine. They leave a question, a shift, a silence that echoes with a new kind of knowing. And when you look around and realize they're gone, that's when you understand you don't need them anymore, because the real teacher now lives inside. When you stop, the answer comes when you stop. Seeking, needing the answer, it appears the harder the mind chases truth, the faster it runs. The more desperately one seeks the answer, the more tangled the thoughts become. It's like trying to smooth water with your hand. The more you stir, the less you see. And yet when the grasping finally stops, when the pressure to know dissolves into quiet acceptance, something shifts the answer. Once hidden in, the noise begins to rise, unforced, uninvited, and suddenly obvious. Because truth doesn't respond to demand, it responds to openness. Need creates friction. It tightens, the body narrows. Perception turns every thought into a test. When the mind needs an answer, it doesn't listen. It interrogates. It doesn't receive it. Hunts. And in that urgency, all that's subtle and intuitive becomes muffled. The answer might already be there, whispering, but it's drowned out by the clamor of expectation. Insight cannot bloom in a storm of desperation, but when you surrender the hunt, when you stop needing the outcome to validate your worth, your direction, your identity space opens. The fog begins to lift like a knot that loosens when left alone. Clarity emerges not from force, but from release. It rises through the cracks of stillness, not the weight of effort. This is the paradox. The answer was never missing. It was only hidden behind the need, and when that need softens, when curiosity replaces desperation, when wonder replaces control, the answer steps forward, not always as a word, sometimes as a knowing, a feeling, a quiet certainty that doesn't shout, but settles. Letting go isn't giving up. It's trusting that the deepest truths don't come on command. They arrive when you're still enough to hear them, and in that silence where needing ends, understanding begins. There is no difference between a full cup and a broken one. If the thirst is gone, desire makes distinctions. It assigns value. It says this is good and that is ruined. A full cup is celebrated. A broken one is discarded. But take away the thirst and both become equal. The story shifts, the obsession fades, and suddenly what once seemed essential becomes irrelevant thirst. Whether for love, approval, wealth, or meaning gives objects their power, it's not the cup that matters, it's the ache behind it. That longing twists the world into hierarchies, wholeness over brokenness, more over less, gain over loss. But when the thirst dissolves, everything softens. The cup is just a shape, the crack is just a line. Neither holds importance unless the heart still craves. This is what the ancient sages meant when they spoke of liberation, not from life, but from longing. When the thirst disappears, so does the suffering. The world remains, but it no longer defines you. You can hold the broken cup without shame. You can leave the full one untouched, because your peace no longer lives at the bottom of either. Most people live in pursuit of the full cup, terrified of the broken one they chase. They compare, they grieve what cracks, but they forget. The real freedom is not in keeping the cup full. It's in no longer needing it to be the thirst. Not the cup is what binds to lose. The thirst is not to lose wonder, is to rediscover the beauty that was never tied to need the silence between sips, the joy of simply being, and in that stillness the broken cup and the full one sit side by side, not as opposites, but as equal reflections of a life no longer defined by hunger. Those who own nothing sleep most peacefully. Possession. Sleep comes to the unburdened. Whispers comfort, but it also breeds weight. The more one owns, the more one must guard. A house filled with things becomes a fortress of fear. A wallet thick with wealth becomes a target. The mind doesn't rest when the hands are always full. It calculates, protects, maintains, and the heart tethered to what might be lost rarely softens enough to sleep deeply. But the one who owns nothing, who clings to nothing, lays their head down with nothing to lose, and in that emptiness, peace finally breathes. Ownership is not just about material things. People own identities, reputations, grudges, expectations they carry invisible vaults, titles, roles, stories. They've told themselves so long they believe they must hold on, but all of it demands attention. Every possession, physical or not, needs energy to preserve it, keeps the mind alert, even in the dark, running imaginary scenarios. What if it's taken, broken, changed, lost? But the one who lets go of ownership, who moves through the world, not as a collector, but as a guest, feels something rare, freedom. They are not guarded. They are not haunted by what if they rest. Not because the world is perfect, but because they no longer ask it to be. They need nothing from it, and in needing nothing, they become rich in ways money can't measure. To own nothing doesn't mean to have nothing. It means to grasp. Nothing to hold everything with open hands, knowing it can stay or go. And either way, you remain whole. That is where true rest lives, not in the locked room, but in the open field. Not in the grip, but in the release. And so they sleep, not because they have all they want, but because they want nothing more. Rest is not earned, it is remembered. The world tells you that rest must be deserved, that only after enough work, enough struggle, enough proving, can you finally lie down and breathe. Rest has been twisted into a reward, dangled just beyond reach, like a prize for endurance. But ancient wisdom whispers something softer, something older. Rest was never something to win. It was something you forgot you always had. Before the schedules, before the deadlines, before the pressure to be constantly useful, rest was part of your nature. The body knew how to soften the breath, knew how to slow, the mind knew how to be still. Children don't ask if they've done enough before they fall asleep in the grass. Animals don't hesitate to stretch out in the sun. Rest isn't granted. It's instinctual, but over time, it gets buried. Under guilt, you were taught that to stop is to fall behind, that slowing down is laziness, that doing nothing must be justified, and so you push, you chase, you grind, carving your worth into exhaustion. But the soul doesn't care about productivity. It craves return, not to achievement, but to wholeness. And to return, you don't need permission, you need remembrance. Rest is not a pause between important things. It is the important thing it is, where healing begins, where clarity seeps in through the cracks, where the nervous system unwinds and the heart relearns its rhythm. Rest doesn't make you weaker. It reminds you that you were never meant to burn, just to be seen. To remember rest is to remember who you are beneath the doing. It is not the world that must allow it. It is you. And when you finally lay down the weight, not because you've earned the break, but because you remember you're already whole, something ancient exhales inside you, and that its suffering as the doorway last is peace. Suffering is often the first garment of awakening. Awakening doesn't begin with light, it begins with weight, with a heaviness so personal, so uninvited, it strips away every illusion of safety. Suffering arrives like a rough cloak thrown over the shoulders, not asked for, not deserved, but undeniable. It itches, it burns, it chafes against everything. Once thought permanent, and yet that discomfort, that unbearable ache, is what breaks the surface of sleep. Suffering doesn't block awakening, it introduces it. At first, pain feels like punishment. It closes the throat, tightens the chest, whispers, lies in the dark. This is the end. But something else stirs beneath that voice. A question, a crack, a silence deeper than grief. It's not the suffering that awakens, but what it destroys. The false certainty, the ego's armor, the belief that things must always go as planned. When all of that collapses, something raw and real is exposed, and in that nakedness, truth can finally touch the skin, No one seeks awakening through suffering, but those who awaken often look back and realize the pain was the doorway, the heartbreak was the teacher, the failure was the beginning of clarity. Suffering shakes the ground not to punish, but to invite. It loosens what never belonged, it interrupts the dream. It says, wake up, look again, nothing is what you thought, and everything you need is already inside you. And like a garment, suffering eventually becomes something to shed, not because it didn't matter, but because it served its purpose. It opened the eyes, it humbled the heart, it softened the mind enough to see the world not as it was feared to be, but as it truly is. Awakening doesn't come dressed in gold, it comes in ash, and those who rise from it carry a different kind of light, one lit not in triumph, but in transformation. Let your breath be your prayer. You don't need words to speak to something greater. You don't need rituals or altars or perfect beliefs. Sometimes all you need is a let breath be the prayer, single breath felt fully deeply, without distraction. That breath, unnoticed by most, is the oldest language. It is what carried you into this world before you knew how to ask for anything. It is what stays with you when everything else falls away. Inhale, that is receiving. Exhale, that is releasing. Each breath is a cycle of surrender, of trust. The lungs do not demand proof that air will be there. They simply open, and that is faith without effort. That is prayer without words. When life is too overwhelming for language, the breath keeps speaking. You are alive, you are still here, you are still connected. People search endlessly for meaning, for something sacred to hold on to, but it's already moving through them every moment. The breath does not judge, it does not discriminate. It shows up in joy and in grief, in triumph and in loss. It stays steady when the mind is spinning, when the heart is breaking, when the world is too loud, and when you finally pay attention to it, really feel it, it becomes a doorway. To let your breath be your prayer is to turn inward and find what you thought was missing. It's to say, this moment is enough. It's to stop running, stop performing, and return to the rhythm that was always guiding you. You don't need to be certain, you don't need to be strong, you just need to breathe with reverence, with presence, with the quiet knowing that this too is holy. The breath is not asking for anything, it is offering everything, and all you have to do is receive it. Like a prayer already answered, a fire cannot burn itself. Let the mind observe the mind. A fire dances, devours, spreads, but it cannot turn inward and consume itself. It cannot look at its own flame, cannot touch its own. Observe the mind. Don't burn in its source. The mind is the same. It thinks, analyzes, reacts. It races through the world, like fire through a dry field, but left unchecked. It never pauses, never sees itself, never questions the source of its own motion. And in that blindness, suffering grows, because thought watching thought is like a flame trying to hold itself in its own hands. It burns endlessly and sees nothing, but something remarkable happens the moment the mind stops trying to be everything and starts watching itself. Instead, the thinking doesn't stop, the noise doesn't vanish, but a distance appears. A quiet witness stirs behind the storm, and in that space, awareness steps forward, not as another thought, but as presence itself. Not fire, but the clear, still air around it. This is not analysis. This is not mental gymnastics. It is a gentle noticing, a turning inward, not to judge, but to observe, to see thoughts rise and fall without being pulled into their gravity, to witness the craving, the fear, the story, and know this is the mind, but I am watching. The mind cannot watch itself. While entangled, it can only be seen. When awareness steps outside of it, true peace begins there, not by silencing the fire, but by no longer mistaking it for you. When the mind observes the mind, its power to control weakens. It still flickers, still speaks, but it no longer drags you through its flames. You become the sky, not the storm, the witness, not the thought, the awareness, not the fire. And in that awareness, the fire settles, not extinguished. Simply seen, and what is truly seen loses its power to burn. Anger is a wind that blows out the lamp of the heart. Anger doesn't always come in flames. Sometimes it arrives as a cold wind, sudden, sharp, invisible, and when it rises unchecked, it doesn't just rage outward, it turns inward, extinguishing the quiet light that once kept you warm, that light your compassion, your clarity, your ability to see without distortion begins to flicker, and if the wind keeps blowing, it dies. There's a moment just before the anger fully takes over, where you can feel it tighten in your chest, the heat behind your eyes the tension in your jaw, and then it begins to speak for you. Think for you, it dresses itself in righteousness, in justice, in defense. But underneath, it is chaos. It demands reaction, not resolution. It makes enemies of loved ones and strangers of yourself. And all the while, the lamp dims the heart when it sees things as they are. It gives space, it listens, it forgives, but anger clouds that vision. It shrinks your world to one moment, one offense, one story you can't let go of. It convinces you that you're strong while quietly cutting you off from the very parts of yourself that make strength, meaningful wisdom, tenderness, grace. This isn't to say anger has no place. It can be a signal, a warning, a fire that burns through illusion, but left unchecked, it becomes destructive. It doesn't clarify, it consumes, and what you're left with is not truth, but smoke to protect the lamp of the heart. You must notice the wind before it rises. You must pause, breathe, step back from the edge, not because you're suppressing, but because you're choosing to guard the light. That light is rare, and once it's out, it takes time to relight, but when it's burning, it shows you a different path, one where power is calm and love is not lost in the storm. The soil never brags about be the soil, not the spotlight tree it grows. The soil stays silent, while roots dig into its chest and draw life from its depths. It says nothing, while the tree rises, stretches toward the sky, blossoms in glory. The soil does not claim credit. It does not shout, "I made this." It does not beg for recognition. It simply holds, nourishes, gives quietly, invisibly, because true support doesn't need applause. It doesn't decorate itself with proof the soil knows what it gave, and that is enough in a world addicted to validation. This kind of humility is rare. People are quick to claim credit, to remind others of what they've done, to attach themselves to success. But real strength, the kind that nurtures others without demanding the spotlight, looks more like soil. It works in the dark. It holds steady when the winds come, and even as the world praises the bloom, it stays grounded. The soil doesn't compete with the tree. It doesn't envy the leaves, the height, the fruit. It understands that its power is not in being seen. It's in being foundational, and the ones who live like this, who support without needing to be known, leave the deepest impact. They are the reason others grow, even if no one ever says their name. To be like the soil is to embrace a quiet kind of greatness, the kind that doesn't need credit to be proud, the kind that finds fulfillment in the rising of others. Because when you've truly given, when your care has taken root in someone else's becoming, you don't need to speak of it. The tree is your echo, and that's enough. One grain of rice can tip the scale. Be mindful of small actions. It doesn't take a boulder to break the balance. Sometimes it's just a grain of rice, quiet, unnoticed, seemingly insignificant, that shifts everything. Life rarely erupts in grand moments. It tilts in subtleties, a whispered word, a glance, a breath held too long. The smallest action can start an avalanche, not because it's loud, but because it lands where the weight was already close to breaking. People overlook the small, they focus on Milestones, titles, declarations, they chase the big gestures, believing that only what's massive makes a difference. But the ancient truth is quieter. The small is the mighty, the kind word that softens a heart, the moment of patience that prevents a fight, the tiny compromise that saves a relationship. These are the grains of rice that no one applauds, but they decide the story every day is full of such grains. The decision to answer gently, the choice to listen, instead of interrupt the half second between impulse and reaction. These moments pass invisibly, but they shape your character more than any speech ever could. One careless comment can unravel years of trust, while one thoughtful gesture can restore what seemed broken. The scale is always weighting, and it doesn't care about size. It cares about timing. Mindfulness begins here in noticing what seems too small to matter, because that's where everything begins. The greatest transformations do not roar. They start with a shift, and often the shift is one grain added or removed. So walk gently, speak carefully. Act with awareness, not out of fear, but out of respect for how close the world always is to changing. And remember, when things feel heavy beyond repair, sometimes the solution isn't to lift the weight, it's to remove a single grain. Clarity arises not from seeking, but from ceasing to seek. The more one searches for clarity, the more it slips through the fingers like mist. The eyes dart, the mind spins, the heart pleads for answers, direction, certainty, and yet the harder the chase, the cloudier everything becomes. This is the great paradox of understanding. It doesn't come from effort, it comes from stillness. It's not found in reaching farther, it's found in stopping in the moment. Seeking ceases, clarity appears, not because it was found, but because the noise that hid it finally went quiet. The act of seeking carries tension. It assumes lack. It's born from the belief that something is missing, that peace lives somewhere else, that truth is always just beyond the next thought. And so thought chases, thought questions, pile on top of questions, and like mud stirred in water, the mind clouds its own vision while trying to see more clearly. But when the seeking stops, not in defeat, but in surrender, something soft emerges, a kind of spaciousness, a deep breath, a silence not empty, but full. Clarity was never gone. It was simply drowned beneath the need to grasp, to fix, to know when the grasping ends, the dust begins to settle, and in that stillness, truth no longer needs to be hunted. It simply reveals itself. Clarity is not a prize earned through struggle. It's a natural state that returns when the struggle ends, like a reflection in still water. It was always there, just waiting for the ripples to fade. The wisest answers don't arrive in the noise of searching. They appear in the space between thoughts, in the quiet acceptance that there is nowhere else to go, nothing else to become stop. Breathe, let go of the chase, and see what was never actually hidden, only obscured by the chase itself. Carry show up in the ordinary water chop wood. Repeat, the mind craves meaning, some great purpose, some revelation that will explain everything. It looks for the extraordinary, for the transformation that feels like thunder. But the deepest truths are found not in the spectacular, but in the repetition of the ordinary. Carry water, chop wood. Repeat. It sounds simple, it sounds dull, but it holds the secret to a life that is grounded, awake, and quietly profound. This phrase is not about the task, it's about presence. To carry water with awareness is not a chore. It is meditation. To chop wood without rushing, without resentment, is to practice discipline and reverence at once. These acts become sacred, not because of what they accomplish, but because of how they're done. They anchor you to the moment. They strip away ego. They humble in modern life. People try to escape the mundane. They want shortcuts, upgrades, peak experiences. But the ancient lesson says, the path to wisdom is not above the routine, it's through it. You do the work not to be seen, not for applause, but because the doing itself shapes you. Every repetition is a return to simplicity. Every return is a chance to go deeper, carry water, chop wood. Repeat, it is a call to show up fully. Even in the smallest tasks, it is the answer to restlessness, the antidote to distraction. When your mind wants to escape, this mantra pulls you back to the body, to the breath, to the now, because in the end, the extraordinary life isn't built from extraordinary moments. It's built from ordinary moments, done with extraordinary attention, again and again without asking for more. And in that repetition, the sacred is revealed not as something you find, but something you become even. Even silence has a tone. Silence has a tone. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a presence, all its own. It enters a room like breath, held just a moment too long, subtle but undeniable. It hums beneath the noise, waits behind every pause, lingers after words fade. Most think silence is empty, but those who listen closely know better. Silence has a tone. It's not heard through the ears. It's felt in the body, in the space between moments, in the truth that words can't reach. The tone of silence shifts in grief. It's heavy, thick, like fog pressing against the chest in awe. It's wide and light, stretching beyond thought, intention. It crackles in love. It wraps like a warm blanket, needing no explanation. Silence is never truly neutral. It speaks, and often it says more than voices ever could. But to hear it, one must stop filling the space. Most people drown silence before it can reveal itself. They rush to fill the gap with chatter, with answers, with movement, afraid of what might rise from the quiet. But silence isn't something to fear. It's a mirror. It reflects back what's real, unedited, raw. That's why it's sacred. That's why it unnerves the wise. Don't just tolerate silence. They lean into it. They hear its tone like a tuning fork for the soul. They let it guide them, soften them, reset them. Because silence isn't passive. It listens back, and when met with presence, it responds even in the stillest moment. Silence carries meaning. It can comfort, confront, reveal, or heal. It may not speak in words, but it sings, and once you learn to hear it, you realize silence was never empty. It was always the most honest voice in the room. You are not the storm. You are not the storm. You are the space it passes through. When the storm comes, it's easy to believe that it defines you, that the fear, the chaos, the rage inside your chest is you. Thoughts spin like wind. Emotions crash like thunder. Identity disappears in the noise, and suddenly you feel as if you are the storm, uncontrollable, dangerous, lost. But you are not the storm. You are the sky that holds it. The storm is temporary. The space is not. The storm is anger, grief, panic, shame. It is loud. It is overwhelming. But even at its peak, it is only moving through the mistake, is thinking that because it feels so close, so real, so loud, it must be who you are. But step back, breathe beneath it. All there is stillness. There is space. There is awareness that awareness is you. The sky never fights the storm. It allows it, holds it, watches. And then when the storm has exhausted itself, the sky remains unbroken, untouched. The storm never damaged it. It only passed through. This is what inner peace truly is. Not the absence of storms, but the deep knowing that they are not you, that you can feel them fully, even be shaken by them without becoming them, that the thoughts shouting in your head are weather, not truth, that your sadness, no matter how heavy, is a visitor, not your identity. You don't need to fix the storm. You don't need to run from it. You only need to remember who you are beneath it. You are the vastness, the space, the watcher. And when you anchor into that, the storm loses its grip. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer owns you. It simply moves, and you remain. Let your thoughts pass. Like birds do not invite them to build nests. Thoughts come and go, like flocks in a shifting sky. They glide in some gentle, some jagged flashing images. Fears memories, needs the mind by nature, observes, but somewhere along the way it starts clinging. A single thought flies through and is mistaken for truth. A worry flutters past and is mistaken for prophecy. Instead of watching them pass, the mind opens its windows, builds perches, and begins feeding them. Soon they nest, they multiply, and the once open sky becomes a crowded cage. Not every thought deserves your attention. Not every feeling is a fact. Not every inner voice is a reflection of your soul. But when you invite these thoughts to stay, when you replay them, feed them, decorate them with meaning, they settle in and take root. They whisper doubts at dawn. They steal peace in the silence. They convince you that you are them, but you are not your thoughts. You are the sky they pass through, and just as the sky does not cling to a single bird, neither must you hold on to every mental visitor. Watch them arrive, nod as they pass, but do not build them homes. Do not feed them stories. Let them keep flying. This is not avoidance. It is awareness. It is the knowing that thoughts are movements, not anchors. That peace isn't found by controlling the sky, but by allowing the flight. Without fear, by remembering that the thought will pass, if only you stop begging it to stay. Let your mind be vast, open, uninhabited, a place where nothing lingers too long, where no thought is treated. Like a guest of honor, watch the birds fly. Watch them leave, and find your peace not in their absence, but in your refusal to let them. Enlightenment is a clearing nest. Enlightenment is not a peak, it is a clearing. Most imagine enlightenment as a summit, high above the noise, beyond the struggle, far removed from the mess of ordinary life, a rarefied place, reserved for the few, earned through effort, discipline, and years of spiritual labor. But the truth is quieter, stranger. Enlightenment is not a peak to be climbed. It is a clearing in the forest of thought, a sudden opening where the mind drops its weapons and the war inside goes still. It is not about rising above life, but falling into it completely. Not escape, but arrival. The mind expects fireworks, revelation, transcendence, but the real moment of awakening often comes with less sound, with a breath, a letting go, a glimpse of reality, without the veil of judgment, not a mountaintop, but a soft place where nothing needs to be added, fixed, or achieved. The struggle for the peak is itself the barrier. The one who chases enlightenment like a trophy carries too much weight to enter the clearing, but the one who stops truly stops, who surrenders the climb, who no longer needs to reach or prove or become. They begin to notice something. The trees thin, the air lightens, the sky opens in the clearing. There is no enlightenment to possess, only the absence of illusion, the ego, the stories, the striving. They fall away like old leaves, and what's left is not divine fire or perfect peace, but space, spaciousness so profound that it makes room for everything, pain, joy, silence, chaos, and holds it without resistance. You don't reach the clearing by rising higher. You reach it by stepping out of the maze, by walking through your own thoughts until they lose their grip. And when you arrive, there is nothing there waiting for you, because nothing is exactly what was missing all along. Be the bamboo, strong, be the bamboo, but flexible. The bamboo doesn't fight the wind. It bends storms, come branches snap all around it, but the bamboo sways and survives. It doesn't resist, it doesn't break, and when the wind passes, it rises again unchanged at its core. This is not weakness, this is resilience, because true strength is not found in rigidity. It's found in the ability to yield without collapsing. The bamboo teaches what so many forget. You don't have to be hard to endure. You just have to know how to bend without losing yourself in life. People are taught to stand tall, stand firm, stand proud, but sometimes pride is brittle. Sometimes firmness turns into stubbornness, and strength becomes a wall that cracks under pressure. The world changes. People leave plans, fall apart. The winds of life blow hard and without warning, and those who cannot bend with grace are the first to break. Bamboo holds its ground, not by resisting change, but by flowing with it. Its roots are deep, yet its body is light. That's the balance, anchored but free. The strong part of you is not the one that clings. It's the one that adjusts, adapts, and realigns. The flexible heart heals faster. The open mind sees more clearly. The gentle spirit endures what force cannot to be. Like bamboo is to embrace paradox, to stand tall with humility, to be grounded yet willing to sway, to hold your shape while letting go of control. And in doing so, you don't just survive, you thrive. You become the rare kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't resist, doesn't shatter you. Become the one who rises after every fall, not because you fought the wind, but because you moved with it. Do not just study the path, walk it barefoot. There's a comfort in studying the path from a distance, reading the books, quoting the sages, talking about stillness, mindfulness, presence. But none of it matters until your feet touch the earth, bare. Vulnerable, real wisdom that stays in the head never transforms the heart. The path is not a concept to admire, it's a terrain to feel. And the only way to feel it is to walk it barefoot. To walk it barefoot means stripping away the armor of intellectual safety. It means not just knowing about compassion, but practicing it. When it's hard, it means not just speaking of detachment, but letting go of the thing you secretly wish to keep. It means not just admiring courage, but standing in fear with your chest open. You can't tiptoe through awakening. You have to bleed a little. Books won't prepare you for what the ground feels like. The stones, the heat, the mud, the cuts. That's where the lessons live. Not in the theory, but in the pain and grace of direct experience. It's humbling, it's messy, but it's true. And the earth responds differently when you meet it without shoes, without ego, without the buffer of always trying to look wise. So many stay on the edges, talking, planning, postponing, but the path doesn't begin until you take the first barefoot step. No guarantees, no map, just presence, just breath, just the next step, felt fully. That's when the journey begins to shape you, not just your ideas about it. To walk it barefoot is to let the path mark you, to let the wind change your pace, to let silence become your teacher. And in the end, the dust on your skin will tell the story, not the words you memorize, but the miles you surrender to with your whole unguarded self. The owl teaches, see in the dark, speak less through the dark, speak only when needed. The owl moves through the night with a presence so silent it becomes part of the darkness itself. It sees what others miss, shadows within shadows, the faintest flicker of movement in the stillest air. It doesn't panic in the unknown. It doesn't wait for light to show the way. It trusts its vision, sharpened not by brightness, but by patience. The owl teaches that clarity isn't about more light. It's about deeper seeing while others stumble, noise-filled and blind. The owl observes, watches, listens to what isn't being said, feels the tension. No one names, it isn't fooled by appearances. It doesn't rush to react, and when it does speak, it's brief, measured, meaningful. The owl doesn't fill the night with chatter. It knows that silence often carries more truth than words. Ever could people often do the opposite? They fear the dark inside themselves, inside others. They fill the silence with noise, explanations, defenses. But the owl reminds us, darkness is not the enemy. It is the proving ground. For wisdom to see in the dark is to trust your inner sight, to feel your way, without needing constant assurance, and to speak only when needed is to honor the weight of words. The wise are not those who know the most, but those who see clearly in uncertainty and speak only when their voice brings light. The owl doesn't dominate the forest, it inhabits it with grace. It claims no spotlight, yet commands deep respect. To live like the owl is to cultivate quiet confidence, to observe before reacting, to see what lies beneath the surface, and to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to say, joy whispers, not shouts, nothing at all. Joy does not shout it, whispers. Real joy doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It doesn't crash through the door or demand to be seen. It slips in quietly, often unnoticed at first, settling in the curve of a smile, in the warmth of a morning light, in the stillness. After a long exhale, joy whispers, and unless the noise inside you softens, you'll miss it entirely. Most. Go looking for joy in the grand aloud, the spectacular. They chase moments that promise fireworks, achievements, possessions, applause, but those bursts fade quickly, leaving behind an even deeper craving. The kind of joy is hollow, a performance, a peak that comes with a crash. True joy is quieter. It asks nothing. It's already enough. It lives in the in-between, in the ordinary, the scent of tea, the sound of rain, the way your chest softens when you're safe. It doesn't beg for attention. It waits. And the moment you stop trying so hard to feel something bigger, there it is, not as a thrill, but as a soft yes from within. The tragedy is that most people turn up the volume on life, trying to feel more, not realizing that joy has been speaking all along in the background. It cannot be forced, it can only be noticed, and when it's heard, it brings not a high, but a deep, grounded peace. The kind that doesn't flare. It remains to hear joy whisper. You must be still. You must be willing to listen, not just with your ears, but with your breath, your skin, your presence. When the shouting of the world quiets, when your expectations loosen, that's when joy leans in, not to dazzle you, but to remind you that everything you needed was never missing, only unheard. The spider trusts the strength of its web more than the approval of the wind. The spider spins without applause. Thread by thread, it builds its fragile masterpiece in silence, with no audience to cheer, no voice to validate, and still it spins. It doesn't wait for calm skies. It doesn't beg the wind to be kind. It places its faith, not in the weather, but in the work, because the spider knows storms will come, breezes will tug, the world will shake. But what matters isn't whether the wind approves, it's whether the web can hold in a world obsessed with approval. This is rare wisdom. People build their lives like they're asking for permission. They second guesses every step, adjusting themselves to avoid disapproval, chasing reassurance like oxygen. But approval is a breeze. It shifts, it passes. It was never meant to anchor anything. What holds is the web, the structure quietly woven from discipline, truth, self-rest. The spider doesn't panic when the wind rises. It doesn't abandon the web or blame the sky. It remains because it knows what it built. It knows the tension, the design, the patience in every strand. It doesn't need validation to believe in its work. And when part of the web tears, it rebuilds quietly. Precisely not because the world told it to, but because that's what strength does. It continues to live, like the spider is to root your confidence in what you know you've built, to find peace, not in external calm, but in internal structure. The world will never stop changing. The wind will never stop blowing. But when you trust your web, your values, your effort, your quiet resilience, you no longer need the wind to agree. You only need to keep spinning, keep showing up, and let the wind do what it will. The spider always knew it was never about the wind. Truth is not told. Truth is felt, not argued. It is felt. Truth doesn't live in perfect sentences. It doesn't hide in clever arguments or the sharp edge of logic. It doesn't need to be proven, explained, or defended. Because when something is true, it lands differently. It bypasses the mind and settles deep in the body. You feel it not as noise, but as stillness, not as certainty, but as a quiet knowing that requires no permission. People try to package truth with words, wrap it in authority, project it through volume, but real truth resists decoration. It shows up raw, often inconvenient, and sometimes without language at all. You recognize it, not because someone said it beautifully, but because something inside you went silent. When you heard it, no applause, no argument, just a pause, a subtle ache, or a deeper breath, as if your soul nodded before your mind could catch up. And that's why truth is so easily missed in a world obsessed with performance. You can listen to 1,000 voices and still feel hollow. You can memorize the teachings of saints and still feel lost, because truth doesn't stick in the head. It moves through the heart. It trembles behind your ribs. It brings tears for reasons you can't explain. It doesn't inform you, it transforms you to find truth. Stop chasing perfect answers. Stop demanding clarity before you feel get quiet. Let the noise settle. Watch what remains. Watch what returns. That's where truth lives. Not in the most convincing story, but in the one that makes everything inside you go. Still, truth doesn't arrive to impress. It arrives to reveal. And when it does, you don't need to speak it. You already are. If the root grows in darkness, it gives life to the flower beneath the surface, where no one looks, where light never touches. The root begins its silent work. It pushes through cold soil, through rock and pressure and quiet decay. It doesn't bloom. It doesn't seek attention. No one gathers to admire its beauty, but without it, the flower would never rise. The color above is born from the wow. Struggle below the root endures the dark, not for glory, but to give life to something greater than itself. There's something sacred in this unseen labor, in the part of life that takes shape far from recognition. The root teaches that what feeds the brightest things often comes from the hardest places, the joy people see in a smile, the strength in someone's posture, the grace in their presence. These are often nourished by pain, silence, and unseen growth. Darkness isn't the opposite of life. It's where life begins. Yet so many rush toward light, terrified of what the dark holds. They forget that the most important transformations don't happen when everything is clear. They happen in confusion, in stillness and solitude. Like the root, we must sometimes grow downward to rise upward. We must find nourishment in what others run from: grief, doubt, failure, uncertainty. The flower is fleeting. It comes and goes with the season, but the root endures it, weathers droughts, anchors against storms, and holds the memory of every winter. And even when the petals fall and the world forgets the bloom, the root remembers and begins again to live. Like the root is to trust in hidden growth, to know that strength does not always shine, that sometimes the most powerful parts of us will never be seen, but they will be felt in every leaf, in every blossom, in every quiet act of beauty we offer the world. Move through life like the cow. The cow does not count its footsteps, it simply grazes. There is a quiet wisdom in the way the cow moves through the field. It does not tally the distance it's walked. It does not measure its progress or compare its path to the others. It doesn't ask, "Have I done enough today?" It simply grazes step by step, mouth to grass, moment to moment, fully present in the act of living. In contrast, humans keep score. They calculate success by hours worked, steps taken, goals met, checkboxes filled. Every day becomes a race, every breath a means to an end, but in chasing forward they lose. The softness of now, the simple act of being of enoughness without proof. The cow is not lazy. It is not unaware. It is simply content with the rhythm of existence. It follows the sun without urgency. It eats when it's hungry. It lies down when it's tired. And in doing so, it teaches a forgotten lesson that value is not in speed or count or output. It is in presence. There is peace in this slowness, in letting go of the scoreboard in your head, in waking up and simply living, eating your food, washing your hands, breathing in the sky, without asking whether it all adds up to something more. Life is not a ledger. You don't have to prove that you deserve to rest. You don't need to justify joy or silence or softness. The cow moves through its day without apology, and maybe that's not foolishness, maybe that's freedom. The question is not how many steps you've taken. It's whether you were there for them, whether you felt the ground beneath your feet, whether you tasted the grass, whether you grazed on life with presence, instead of rushing past it for a destination that never arrives. You do stop chasing peace. Not own peace. It visits those who stop chasing it. Peace is not a possession. It can't be bought, won, or held down with clenched fists. It's not earned through control or conquered through perfection. The more you chase it, the faster it drifts like a bird startled by sudden movement. Peace flees from the grasping hand, but when you stop running, when you stop bargaining with the moment, stop demanding that life be different, peace arrives quietly, unexpectedly, like sunlight spilling through a window you forgot to open. Most chase peace like a prize. They seek it in silence, in stillness and retreats and routines. They try to earn it with effort, but peace doesn't respond to force. It responds to letting go. It isn't found in the removal of all discomfort, but in the willingness to sit with it without needing to fix it. Peace comes not from making life calm, but from becoming calm in the middle of it. It doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to stop becoming for a moment, to stop chasing the next solution, the next explanation, the next way to escape your thoughts. Peace doesn't come when everything is figured out. It comes when you realize you don't have to figure it all out. It visits when the mind grows quiet, not because you silenced it, but because you stopped wrestling with it. It finds its way in when you stop closing all the doors in panic and finally open one in surrender. You do not own peace, because peace cannot be owned. It's not a state you conquer, it's a presence you allow. And the moment you stop chasing it, like it's somewhere else, it reveals that it was never far at all, just waiting for you to finally stop and be. The mirror does not correct the face, it only reflects it. A mirror has no agenda. It doesn't edit, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't distort, to comfort or to condemn. It simply shows what is exactly as it is without commentary or correction. The mirror doesn't try to fix the face. It doesn't apply filters or soften the lines. It just reflects quietly, honestly, and in doing so, it offers something rare in this world, unfiltered truth. But most people don't want reflection. They want reassurance. They want the mirror to lie a little, to tell them what they wish were true, to hide the parts they still can't love. And when the mirror doesn't do that, they turn away. Not because the mirror failed, but because it succeeded too well. It revealed what they weren't ready to see. The mind works the same way. It tries to be the mirror, but it becomes the editor. It judges, it adjusts, it explains, it masks the raw truth beneath layers of interpretation, but real awareness, real self. Knowing asks for a return to still reflection, to look without resistance, to observe. Without trying to control the image, the mirror doesn't tell you who you are. It shows you who you think you are. It gives you the chance to see clearly, to accept, to soften toward what's been hidden. And in that seeing, transformation begins not because the mirror changes anything, but because you do. You don't need the mirror to correct the face. You need the courage to face the reflection, to stop fixing and start witnessing. That's where healing starts, not in the edits, but in the willingness to sit with what is until judgment fades and truth is all. Open the inner eye that's left. An unopened eye sees only dreams. There's a difference between seeing and being awake. The unopened eye may flutter with visions filled with color and motion, with stories that feel real, but they are not grounded. They are dreams, beautiful, haunting, sometimes profound, but untethered from truth until the eye opens. What is seen is not the world. It's a reflection of the mind's own restless spinning, and no matter how vivid the dream, it fades in daylight because only the open eye can see what is to live. With eyes closed is to move through life, half asleep, guided not by presence, but by projections. People dream with their eyes open all the time. They see through filters of desire, fear, memory, and expectation. They don't meet life, they interpret it. They confuse their thoughts about the world for the world itself, but the unopened eye doesn't just miss reality, it replaces it. Opening the eye is not simply about vision, it's about awakening. It means being willing to see clearly, even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when it shatters illusions you've clung to. For years, it means letting go of the dream that kept you safe and stepping into a reality that asks more of you: honesty, awareness, responsibility. Dreams can teach, they whisper truths in metaphor, but they are not the path. They are invitations to wake. To open the eye is to see things as they are, no as you wish them to be. It is to feel the ground beneath your feet instead of floating endlessly in imagined skies. You can learn in dreams, but you can only live with your eyes open. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is not to dream more, but to open your eyes and stay awake. Rest like the moon, visible or not always whole. The moon doesn't panic when it disappears. It doesn't rush to prove its light or explain its darkness. It waxes, it wanes, it rests in shadow without apology, and yet whether seen or unseen, it is always whole, never broken, never incomplete, just moving through phases. The world doesn't always understand. People, on the other hand, often feel they must be constantly shining, always productive, always present. Rest becomes something to earn, something tinged with guilt, something confused with failure. And when they need to retreat, when their light dims, they fear they've lost themselves. But like the moon, nothing has been lost, only hidden, only resting. You're not less. When you're tired, you are not broken. When you need to pull away. The moon teaches this, that pulling back is not weakness. It is rhythm. That dimming is not disappearance. It is renewal. There is a quiet power in those who know how to pause, how to honor their need for silence, how to trust that even in stillness, they are enough rest. Like the moon, stop performing for the sky. Let the world forget you for a while, if it must. You are no less whole in the dark. You are no less worthy when unseen. Let your cycles unfold without judgment. You are part of something ancient, something cosmic. Your energy, like the moonlight, is not gone. It's simply shifting, and when it's time to rise again, to glow, to speak, to move, you will not because you forced it, but because you trusted the phase you were in, because you remembered the truth. The moon never forgets. You are always whole, even in your quietest hour. To touch the bow to the earth, to touch the sky, sky bow to the earth. Ambition tells you to rise, to climb, to reach, to stretch beyond what's known. The sky becomes a symbol of greatness, of freedom, of arrival. But what ambition often forgets is that height without grounding is fragile. A tree cannot touch the sky unless its roots bow deep into the earth. A mountain stands tall only because it rests on something vast, unmoving and silent beneath it. The secret is ancient and simple. To truly rise, one must first humble the world, glorifies ascent, be more, get more, show more, but in chasing the sky, many forget the soil. They lose touch with stillness, with gratitude, with the weight of the moment beneath their feet. They seek elevation, but without reverence, and so they float, but never truly grow, because the sky is not a place you conquer. It is something you align with through grounded living, to bow to. The earth is to honor where you came from, is to feel your limits, not as cages, but as sacred containers, is to slow down, to sink into humility, to recognize that every high place was once a valley. The deepest wisdom grows from kneeling, whether in prayer, in grief, in awe, and those who bow do not shrink. They stabilize. Touching the sky is not about height, it's about balance. It's not a destination, it's a reflection of how deeply you've honored what supports you. The ones who soar without roots are always at risk of falling, but those who bow first, who ground themselves in truth, presence, and humility, find their rise to be steady, natural, and unstoppable, because the sky does not belong to the arrogant. It opens only to those who remember to bow that which cannot bend. What can't bend will break, will break. Rigidity may look like strength, but it is the most fragile form of power. A tree that refuses to sway in the wind will crack at its core. A mind that cannot adjust will shatter under change. A heart that clings too tightly will rupture in disappointment. What resists the flow of life, believing it can hold its shape forever, is always the first to fracture. People are taught to stand firm, to be unyielding, to draw lines that must never be crossed. They believe that to bend is to betray themselves, but life is not a statue. It is a storm, a river, a breath. It moves, and those who survive it, who grow through it, are not the ones who hold their posture at all costs, but the ones who learn to lean, to pivot, to yield with grace. Bending is not the same as breaking. It is not defeat. It is resilience. It is the understanding that flexibility is a kind of wisdom, that in moments of pain, uncertainty, or conflict, the one who can soften, even just a little, is the one who endures, the one who remains rooted without becoming rigid, the one who listens instead of defending, who adapts without losing their essence. Iron snaps, bamboo sways, one falls, the other survives. When you find yourself resisting, gripping, bracing for impact, ask if it's because you're protecting your truth or simply afraid to change. Ask whether standing tall in this moment means standing alone, brittle and blind to what's coming. Because life will ask you to bend. It will ask you to loosen the plans, the pride, the pain, and if you can't, it won't wait. But if you can, if you let go just enough to stay intact, you will bend, with the wind not against it, and when the storm passes, you'll still be standing, not despite your softness, but because of it. Compassion is the bravest strength in its gentlest form. Most people mistake strength for hardness. They imagine it as a shield, impenetrable, unmoved, cold compassion. By contrast, seems soft, fragile, easily wounded, but in reality, compassion is strength's purest expression. It takes more courage to remain gentle in a harsh world than it does to armor yourself against it. Compassion requires the deepest bravery of all, to keep the heart open even when it hurts. True compassion isn't pity. It isn't looking down from above, safely removed. Compassion is standing side by side, feeling the ache of another's wound as if it were your own without drowning in it. It's strength in vulnerability. It's the steady hand reaching out, not from superiority, but from understanding. It doesn't judge pain, it simply holds it. The world has convinced many that compassion is weakness, that caring too deeply makes you fragile. But compassion isn't about sacrificing yourself. It's about refusing to sacrifice your humanity. It's the refusal to let bitterness define you, the refusal to let the cruelty of others shape the softness in your heart. Compassion is a quiet rebellion against cynicism in moments of anger. It chooses to forgive in moments of hurt. It chooses empathy. Compassion doesn't deny suffering, it transforms it. It sees clearly without flinching. It holds space without collapsing, and in doing so, it becomes powerful beyond measure. Anyone can turn cold, withdraw, numb out. That's easy, but to remain kind in the face of cruelty, gentle amid violence, patient in the storm that takes true strength. Compassion isn't passive. It's fiercely alive, fiercely awake, and it heals not just the other, but the one brave enough to offer it. Even the loudest waterfall finds calm at the bottom. The waterfall's roar seems relentless, a thunderous declaration of power that drowns out everything else. Each drop crashes with intent, carving rock and demanding attention. Yet where that turbulent descent meets the riverbed, something extraordinary happens. The water's fury softens, the surface flattens, and a reflective pool emerges. What was once chaos becomes clarity, movement becomes stillness, and the very force that seemed uncontainable surrenders to serenity. People often live like the waterfalls, crest rushing toward every deadline, every crisis, every high-intensity moment, believing that power is measured by volume and speed, but when the rush finally ends, they find themselves exhausted, their minds churning like white foam. It's only when they reach the base, when they allow themselves to settle, that they discover the hidden sanctuary below the noise, a space to heal, to reflect, and to breathe. That calm pool holds secrets the roar could never reveal. The pebbles smoothed by 1,000 tumbles, the fish gliding in gentle currents, the subtle ripples that catch the light. In the same way, our own deepest insights surface, not in the frenzy of doing, but in the hush of being. The waterfall's strength isn't extinguished by the pool's stillness. It transforms into something even more profound, a mirror to the soul, showing us that true power lies in the ability to yield to pause and to finally rest. You be the mountain, not the echo, are not the echo. You are the mountain that created it. An echo only repeats what it hears. It carries no origin, no substance of its own, but the mountain that made it stand strong, shaping every sound before it even begins. There's power in being the source, rather than the reflection. An echo can't choose its voice or its message. It's bound by the canyon that gave it life. The mountain, however, decides what to release and what to hold, when to let the wind carry its roar, and when to remain silent. Too often, people live as echoes, reflecting opinions, fears, expectations picked up from others. Words land in the canyon of the heart and return as certainty, doubt, or self-judgment. But they aren't truly one's own. In that echo chamber, identity erodes. The mind becomes a hollow mirror, shaped by outside forces. But the mountain within each person remembers its own ground. It knows the bedrock of values, the contours of authentic desire, the quiet conviction that precedes any voice. Being the mountain means choosing carefully what to amplify. It means sensing which thoughts deserve passage and which should stay lodged in the rock. It means understanding that not every shout needs to be thrown back into the world. Strength isn't measured by how loudly an echo resounds, but by how deeply the source shapes the valley of the soul. A mountain silent in its grandeur carries more presence than echoes screaming for attention. When storms howl and echo trembles, the mountain stands. When winds shift, direction echoes scatter. The mountain endures, and when inner chaos threatens to repeat old patterns, the mountain's core remains unmoved, anchored in purpose. In truth, in the certainty that echoes may fade, but the source persists without apology. In learning to stand as the mountain, the voices that return become guides, not shackles, and the world hears at last in originality no echo could ever match. Let sorrow pass through, not let sorrow flow. Don't hold it, take root. Sorrow can arrive like a sudden storm, drenching every corner of the heart in cold regret and aching loss. At first, its weight feels impossible to carry each breath, a reminder of what was lost or never was. But sorrow is like rainwater on thirsty soil. If you let it pull and stagnate, it invites weeds of bitterness, regret, and resentment to take hold. Yet if you allow it to flow, absorbed, filtered, and released, it nourishes empathy, resilience, and wisdom. Instead of choking your spirit, when sorrow finds its way, and the instinct is often to hide from it, to seal ourselves off until the ache disappears. But walls built around grief only trap it, giving it time and space to deepen its roots. The key is not to resist feeling, but to feel with intention, to let sorrow trickle through your awareness, to acknowledge its cold touch, and then to let it wash on like a river carving canyons. Sorrow shapes us most when it moves, not when it stagnates. Notice how tears cleanse more than they mourn, how remembering gently can honor pain without inviting it to linger. Allow the waters of sorrow to carry away what must go rather than damming them up until they erode your foundations. This is not avoidance. It is stewardship of the heart. It's recognizing that grief has a purpose, but not a permanent home when sorrow moves through you instead of settling in. It leaves behind a quieter strength, a tenderness that reaches deeper than before, and in that soft aftermath, you discover that life continues, not in spite of sorrow, but because you refuse to let it take root. The sacred is not far, it hides in. The sacred is in the ordinary moments. The sunrise doesn't wait for a ceremony. The first bird doesn't need a stage. The sacred arrives in the steam that curls from your morning cup, in the laughter that spills between friends, in the pause when you catch your own reflection in a passing window. It doesn't live behind temple walls or in rarefied rites. It lives in the heartbeat of the mundane, waiting for someone to notice people spend lifetimes chasing awe-climbing peaks, crossing deserts, seeking visions, forgetting that wonder is available in the quiet crack of a door, in the warmth of sunlight on a scarred hand, in the way a child's question can crack open a closed mind. Those ordinary moments are not background noise. They are the doorway, but the mind, busy with to-do lists and deadlines, often walks past without bowing, without kneeling, without whispering. This is holy. To see the sacred in the ordinary requires unlearning urgency. It demands slowing down just enough to feel the weight of a leaf drifting to the ground, to hear the soft echo of rain against a tin roof, to taste the sweetness in a tear released after too long, a silence in those breaths. Between tasks behind the veil of habit, everything you've been told is trivial becomes profound. This is not a teaching reserved for mystics. It is the invitation of your own life to recognize that you've been living a tapestry of miracles stitched into the everyday. The sacred doesn't require mists of incense or chants in distant tongues. It simply asks you to tilt your head, soften your eyes, and remember that every moment, no matter how small, carries the weight of wonder. Truth does not need defenders, it endures. Truth stands by its nature, like a mountain in a storm. It is not shouted, it simply is when lies rally their armies, angry voices, frantic protests, desperate logic. They swarm around it, trying to bury it in noise, but truth does not tremble at the onslaught. It is not a soldier marching brandishing sword and shield. It is the silent bedrock beneath battles, the still water reflecting every falsehood until they crack on its surface. Attempts to defend truth aggressively often backfire. They transform honesty into rhetoric, clarity into conflict, and devotion into arrogance. Yet the true word, the clear fact, the pure insight unchanged by time, untarnished by circumstance, persists beyond the den, beyond the era, beyond the moment. People who rush to guard truth sometimes betray its power, turning defense into siege. They erect barriers, draw lines, brand dissenters as traitors, while the genuine truth quietly outlasts fear, hostility, and prejudice. It resonates in the moments of unexpected recognition, in the pause when a falsehood collapses under its own weight. You don't protect truth by raising voices. You honor it by living it, by speaking it when it matters, by showing up. When silence is louder than lies, and when the noise finally fades, the truth remains untouched by all that tried to contain it. Kindness is the language. Even kindness speaks. Even in silence, silence understands. Kindness speaks without sound. It reaches across barriers stronger than any argument, deeper than words, can plumb a gentle gesture, holding a door, offering a smile to a stranger, listening without agenda, carries meaning that transcends speech. Silence itself leans in to receive it, because in that moment, kindness fills the empty space with warmth and recognition, reminding us we are not alone when life feels heavy. Words often fail. They stumble over grief, collapse under guilt, or ring hollow against the roar of pain, but kindness doesn't need eloquence, it needs only presence. It is the hand laid lightly on a shoulder, the quiet offer of water, the patient glance that says, "I see you." In those acts, silence is transformed no longer a void, but a cradle for connection. Remarkable things happen when kindness moves through silence. A heart tight with worry unfolds, a wounded spirit breathes, and even within ourselves, the simple act of self-kindness, pausing to rest. Speaking gently in the mind, forgiving a misstep, speaks volumes. It heals the crack inside us that words alone cannot reach. Compassion seeps into the corners, dissolving shame and inviting the soul to remember its own worth. Kindness demands nothing. It isn't bargaining for favor or building a ledger of good deeds. It is offered freely, aware that its impact may bloom unseen, and yet those unseen ripples alter the world. A small kindness can diffuse anger, bridge isolation, awaken hope in its quiet force. It reminds us we share this space together, and that respect and care are the true currency of human bonds. Even in the deepest silence, where sorrow or fear has stolen the voice, kindness whispers hope it doesn't. Shout solutions or insist on understanding it. Simply reaches out steady and soft, trusting that the gentlest touch can awaken what words could never stir, and in that gentle exchange, the silence itself learns to speak once more. Let go of the rope and the knot will loosen. When you clutch the rope with desperate strength, the knot only tightens every tug. Every pull reinforces the entanglement, your fear, your anger, your anxiety, until you're trapped in your own grip. But the ancient insight reminds us that struggle often deepens the wound. It is in release, not force, that freedom begins. Letting go of the rope doesn't mean denying the knot exists. It means trusting that the tension will ease when you stop feeding its pull. Imagine a coil of threads so knotted that every attempt to pry them apart only seals them tighter. It's the same with the mind, clinging to worry, replaying the same memories, fighting the feelings you fear. You become the prison guard and the prisoner, tightening the bars that hold you. The rope becomes both your weapon and your cage. Yet the moment you relax your hold, the knot loosens beneath your gentle touch, as if it needed permission to unwind. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It takes courage to face the knot without wrestling it to step back. Breathe, and acknowledge that control is an illusion. You realize that strength doesn't come from resisting the tangle, but from surrendering the illusion of power over it. In that pause, a subtle shift occurs. The tension begins to dissolve, the pattern unravels, and what seemed impossible starts to give way when you let go. You aren't abandoning the struggle, you're transforming it. You create space for clarity, for insight, and for healing. The knot doesn't disappear overnight, but with each moment of non-resistance, it loosens its hold, and in that gentleness you discover something profound. Release is not defeat, but the gateway to true mastery over the entanglements you once thought inescapable.